The radio only spoke after midnight, and only if you promised to keep your voice low. It said this the first night, in a voice that sounded like a warm hand over a microphone, soft and careful, the way people talk in kitchens when someone's asleep down the hall. You were sitting on the floor with your back against the couch because that felt closer to the ground, to the living room's low hum, to the reasonable idea that nothing bad happens on a Wednesday when the air smells like laundry and rain. The radio was a thrift store thing, backlight case, a dial with cities that no longer have stations, a frayed cord you shouldn't have trusted. You bought it because it looked like it would keep you company without insisting on conversation. You told yourself you were done with insistence. You told yourself you were done with talking to objects. At 11:58, you turned the dial to a place with no numbers. You did it like a joke, the way you flip a coin to ask what you already know. Static answered, a handsome hush. The needle trembled. The room put its weight into the corners as if settling. 12 lights on the digital oven clock released their red segments and tried again. Midnight arrived without pageantry, the way good guests do. Good evening, the radio breathed. Not a broadcast, an aside. You glanced at the cord to make sure you had actually plugged it in. You had. You looked for a speaker you'd left on. You had left none. The voice cleared its throat, though there was nothing to clear. You're early, it said, pleased. I like early. You didn't answer because sometimes not answering is politeness. Also, there was a part of your mind that preferred the evidence chain. Rain smell, cord, thrift shop receipt bruised in your pocket, static, voice. You waited. Waiting is a skill the city teaches, even when you don't mean to learn. I read the thoughts people write in pencil, it said, conversational. Only pencil, only the ones that get erased or never reach the paper at all. I read them when their edges are soft. That's when they're kindest. Are you a station? You said, because it seemed important to categorize the things speaking in your dark room. No, it said, almost laughing. I'm a window. I face midnight. I can be climbed through, if you like. You pictured yourself swinging both legs through a radio the size of a bread loaf, and someone in a cartoon watching your shoes kick as you vanished. You pictured being 10 and turning the wooden dial on your grandfather's set to find baseball voices asleep in the wires, a country stretched by play-by-play into a place you could cross. What's on the other side, you asked. People's best attempts, the radio said. The good drafts, the apologies they rehearse and never deliver. I keep them until they're needed. I return them when asked. You laughed out loud then, a sound that belonged to your own house and not to whatever sat humming in a backlight box. You're an archive of unsent texts and steward of speeches abandoned in showers, it said, and custodian of grocery lists that try to be prayers, and auditor of sighs. You can't audit sighs, you said, interested despite yourself. Sighs aren't intentional. Intentionality is overrated, it said. Sighs count. They're the exhale of a word that couldn't bear its own consonants. I catalog them by hour and humidity. Would you like to hear yours? No, you said too quickly, and the radio approved, a little pulse in the static like a cat, pleased by the restraint you show in not waking it. Outside, a car passed making that small river sound tires make on wet streets. In the apartment above, the neighbor with the clogs paced his kitchen and then stopped. A cabinet door clicked and then clicked again because the hinge didn't catch the first time. He murmured something to the sink or to the glass he was holding. The night was busy with small lives. You felt like a badly behaved spy. If I say yes, you asked, what do you ask in return? Nothing at first, the radio said, honestly cheerful. Later, I ask for your quiet. Later still, I ask for your company. And at the end, if you've made use of what I kept for you, I ask for one thing you'll never need again. I don't have many of those, you said. You have a few, the radio said gently. Everyone does. We hold on out of habit. We mistake weight for meaning. It's very human. I am fond of it. What's your name, you asked, because names teach a situation to hold still. I'm the night letter, it said promptly, weirdly proud. An address for what gets written without stamp. You can call me Post. You're a radio called Post, you said, grinning. Fine, Post. What does keeping company look like? You don't have to talk, it said. You can sleep. I will keep count. If you want to hear a draft, I'll read it. If you want me to hold one, I'll store it. You may ask me at any hour to return what you gave me. I am punctual. What do you do with the ones you don't return, you asked. They compost, Post said, and you liked the word in its mouth. Old drafts feed better ones. No one owns a sentence. We borrow them from the air and give them back with handprints. I don't think that's how writing works, you said, and the radio smiled in static. Your grandfather's game came back to you. The pitch described in a voice that made distances believable. The voice had been a companion without intrusion. You had fallen asleep on a couch younger than this one. The radio, a warm animal on the table. The words had braided themselves into the dark. The night had been kept like a promise. Will you read me one? You asked. Not mine. Someone's that won't hurt to know. I don't keep the hurtful ones long, Post said. They need speed, not archive. But yes, here is a good attempt. A first-person plural written in pencil over a grocery list. Filed, Post said, satisfied, and you imagined a dim warehouse of shelves with notes bound in twine, the air smelling like pencil and citrus and glue. What do you want for that, you asked, because good bargains begin with clarity. Tonight, nothing, Post said. Tomorrow, you'll worry at 3 in the morning when you wake and count zeros on the ceiling. Give me that one worry, the one with the long tail. Hand it over clean. I will keep it for 4 nights. On the 5th, I will hand it back to see if it has shrunk enough to share the bed. If it hasn't, you asked, I will keep it another cycle, Post said. Pragmatic. I am patient. That is my work. You lay down on the carpet and looked at the underside of the coffee table as if it were sky. The knot in the wood looked like a cyclone photographed from space. The oval in the grain looked like an island with a single road and one store and a post office with no stamps, just a person at a window handing out envelopes if you promised not to mail them. Your body softened its argument with the day. Outside, a siren passed and then contritely turned away, as if embarrassed at having raised its voice near your building. In the apartment above, your neighbor set a glass down on a counter and then set it down again. You tried not to think of how many nights you'd slept like a soldier, listening for orders from a war you had not chosen. I will count, Post offered, gentle, in a language that does not have numbers. It goes like this. The radio made a sound like wind through wheat, then like beach wave at night, a long sibilant breath, then like a train heard at a distance, comfort plus geometry. The pattern repeated, settled, repeated. Your chest followed without your consent, your jaw unwound. You did not sleep so much as agree to be kept by something unalarmed. When you woke the next morning, the note you had written still sat under the radio's feet. You slid it out. The pencil looked fresher, the loops more decided. You wondered if the act of filing had taught the letters how to be themselves. On the back, in a hand not yours, a small penciled square had been added at the top left corner, as if to prepare it for a stamp it would not receive. Inside the square, an initial P. I didn't give you permission, you said, but you weren't angry. The square looked like a wink. It looked like an addressed envelope that knew better than to perform urgency. All day you carried the radio like a secret in your spine. The elevator sighed you up and down, laughing about nothing. The emails came ready to be answered by the version of you who opens gates with kindly sentences. The coffee was wrong, and you didn't adore it, and you drank it anyway because sometimes fussiness is pretending the world will be in any way controllable at 3. When the long tail of the worry came at 3, on schedule, with its catalog of zeros and what ifs and you shoulds, you was ready. You said aloud that you would like to deposit an item. You imagined Post sliding open a drawer at a midnight window and nodding once, not unkindly. The worry looked at your hands and narrowed. It always had. You laughed at yourself and at it, gently, like you'd laugh at a friend who brings a suitcase to dinner. I have kept worse, Post said when midnight returned and you reported on your performance. And stranger, once a woman gave me the worry about whether a ghost could catch a cold. Once a man gave me a coin he had swallowed when he was 6 and had never forgiven his throat for letting it go. I wrote its outline down and filed it. He was lighter after. You aren't a radio, you said, and meant I believe you. I am as much a radio as I need to be for you, and entirely one for someone else, Post said, unbothered. We make our mouths according to the ears. Whose ears are you using now, you asked, unhelpfully trying to picture them. This turned out to be a mistake. You saw 100 sleeping heads at once and closed your eyes. I am using yours, Post said. Stop trying to make the night bigger than it is. It has enough to do. The second week you wrote more notes than you had planned. People kept speaking to you during the day as if they were testing doors. You didn't mind. Not exactly. You minded the echo. At night, you slid what you had written. No apology for sleeping. Please let me treat fabric well, under Post's little feet. It took them carefully. It filed them in lullabies. It returned one when you asked, and you were surprised to find you needed it less. It returned another folded smaller than you'd written it, as if it knew how to make paper tidy without tearing. One it did not return at all. That one composted, Post said gently. It fed something better and vanished. Did you keep the better thing, you asked, curious, not jealous? For the person you wrote it about, Post said. They will ask for it on a Friday in a laundromat 3 neighborhoods over. They will think it was theirs all along. It will be. That is how gifts work when you want to sleep after giving them. If this was thievery, it was the kind that left your pockets heavier. New ways to name the same country. You learned to count in radio. You learned to deposit worry like coin and walk around without the shift in your stance that comes from carrying change you can't spend. You learned to praise boring. You learned without ceremony that the word good night said into a room that answers can be a bridge. One night you asked what Post wanted in return. Now, since you could feel the weight of asking, the ledger of your comforts and its keeping, bring me a sound, it said, one you have been holding in your teeth. It was so specific you laughed. You brought it a laugh. That wasn't the sound. You brought a sigh. Not that either. You brought the small sound you make when you stand up from a low couch and your knees insist on being consulted, which is the sound of a person honest about limits. Closer, Post said, delighted. Finally, you brought what it wanted. The noise between breath and speech when you almost say I love you and choose correctly to say it differently. You had been holding that sound for months without admitting it had shape. There, Post said, absurdly tender, and took it from you as if removing a thread from your sleeve. You felt ridiculous, and then relieved. The apartment, which has never been a person, felt like it smiled without spoiling its face. Post hummed a moment, filing. I will return that one in winter, it said, on a break between songs in a grocery store. You will be buying oranges and forget why. When you hear it, you will remember the shape of your mouth, and you will not be surprised. What if I forget the shape, you asked, already forgetting and relieved at the idea. Then I will keep it longer, Post said. I am patient. That is my work. You began to suspect that the radio was not just a keeper of things, but a teacher of how to put them down without drama. Some nights you were greedy and tried to give it whole categories, all the hours between 3 and 4, all the drafts you'd ever composed while washing dishes. It polite you down. Itemize, it instructed. Inventory is love pretending to be boring. One night you ask for something from it, something you had not written. You ask for a letter you could never have composed, the kind that begins Dear Future Me, and is an apology for underestimating joy. You want a blessing, Post said. Those are above my pay grade. I am logistics, but I can give you a label that fits on a jar. It read in a voice that made the inside of your ribs feel like shelves holding useful glass. For fear you can keep, it said. For fear you can surrender. For silence you earned. For silence you mistook for punishment. For nights that need counting. For mornings that will arrive regardless. For a mouth learning not to hold coins. For a bed that is not a field hospital. You slept to that list. You slept to the confidence that labels do not cure, but they keep you from mistaking vinegar for honey. You slept thinking about jars lined up and tidy. When the first storm of the season rolled over the city and the window admitted a ribbon of rain under it, because that is what windows do in honest apartments, you put a towel down without swearing. Post asked if you wanted to hear the drafts people wrote during storms. You said maybe, then yes. It read a sentence a woman spoke in her kitchen when the power died. I will not be cinematic about this. It read a sentence a man wrote on his hand because he had no paper. If I love you at noon, I should love you in outages. It read a sentence a child said to their dog, we are safe because you are here. It read these into your room like a person adding logs at even intervals to a fire you cannot see. You slept, and when you woke, there was a note under the radio's feet in the neat pencil of the world. You have used your ledger well. Please bring me one thing you will never need again. You folded laundry. You made the bed. You walked around your small apartment, touching its reliable edges until your hand and the walls agreed. You sat on the floor with your back against the couch and thought longer than you usually allow yourself to think without looking at anything else. By midnight, you knew. It was a phrase. You had needed it once when you thought being careful required proof. You had said it to yourself before sleep like a gate. You had woken with it stuck to the roof of your mouth. You had repeated it to friends to sound morally tidy. You had whispered it when you were trying not to ask for help because asking would show the wrong hand. You wrote it down and read it aloud to Post, the way you had read the promises that first night. I'm fine, you said clearly, and waited for the shame to come. It didn't. Relief did. You laughed again, not because it was funny, but because laughing is a way to give air to things that shouldn't sit in a room taking up space. You slid the paper under the radio. The radio accepted it with ceremony, which is to say none. Filed, Post said. Composted, returned never. There is a better sentence if you need one. It begins, I am here. Read it to me, you asked, because sometimes you want a voice that is not yours to be in charge of the room. Post read. It sounded like rain that knows the windowsill, like a store with a careful clerk, like a letter you open in a kitchen and do not need to sit down for. It sounded like sleep arriving without coin tossing and without insisting your eyes stay open to prove vigilance. You turned the dial to nowhere and left it there. You promised the room you'd be quiet and meant it without feeling erased. Midnight found you and humored you and kept the ledger and counted the drafts and archived the sighs by humidity. Another week came and another. Some nights you spoke, some nights you slept, some nights Post read the things you forgot you'd given it, and you had the joy without the work of composing. Some nights it apologized for static, and you forgave it because weather is no one's fault. On the night a different voice broke in, thin, urgent, like a pencil on the wrong side of paper. You sat up too fast, and the world slid briefly. Is there anyone there? The thin voice asked, breathless. There is, Post said, even. There is always someone. Can you return something early? The thin voice asked. I thought I could wait. Post glanced at you, if a radio can glance. You nodded because nodding is a way to let the night know you will share the window. The radio went formal. Item description, it asked. Kind but efficient. A sorry that doesn't undo anything, the thin voice said, almost breaking, but it might help me sleep. Filed under Tuesday. Rain dish soap, post said, flipping a page you couldn't see. Got it? Confirm name? The voice gave one. You didn't hear it. Post asked for permission. The voice gave it. Post cleared its throat, the way rain clears roofs, and read a sentence that made your own chest change shape, as if your ribs had been rearranged to accommodate something you hadn't known how to store. When it finished, the thin voice said, "Thank you," a sound like a window closing against wind. The room understood. The ledger understood. You and Post sat together quietly while the city decided whether to sleep. "Company," Post said after a while, pleased. "That's all I ask." You put your palm on the warm shell of the radio. You counted forward once, not because you needed to, but because the numbers wanted to be walked. Post made the beach wind wet train sound. You thought of jars with correct labels and phrases you would never need again, and sentences that came home when called. You slept the way a letter sleeps when it has been delivered, creased, sure, not waiting for anything else to be written on it. The week learned your habits and walked beside them. At midnight, you turned the dial to nowhere, and Post answered as if it had been waiting at a window with a book and a thermos. Not impatient, just ready. You deposited the small, inventorable anxieties with a seriousness that made them shrink in your hands. The worry that the plant would finally give up on you. The worry that you had laughed at the wrong moment on a call and no one had corrected you. The worry that the light in the stairwell meant something you should have understood and didn't. Post slid each into a drawer that wasn't a drawer, labeled in pencil in a handwriting that looked like rain, that has learned to keep its shape. And here and on some nights it returned one thing you didn't expect, the impulse to apologize for sleeping. It set the impulse on the table between you and said, gently, that it had no use. On a Tuesday that felt like a Thursday in disguise, the radio caught a seam in the air, static sharpened. Underneath Post's wheat beach train came a second sound, too bright, too tidy, a voice ironed flat. It didn't ask for quiet. It announced, "Good evening, darlings," it said, with the lacquer of good manners over something greedy. You're listening to Midnight Caller. Tonight's topic is shortcuts. 3 words to undo regret, 7 to guarantee forgiveness, 1 name to ensure you are never alone. Post didn't turn down, it turned aside, the way a person angles their shoulders to let a rush of bodies pass. Do not answer that, it said to you, conversational, while the caller kept talking like a salesman at a fair with a microphone and no shame. What is it? You asked, because not naming a thing makes it taller. A pirate on dead air, Post said. It eats vowels and offers discounts. It sells clocks that run backward. It asks for names and hands you questions with teeth. It is not a window, it is a mirror with music. Go make the kettle loud. You did. The kettle's straightforward boil made a decent wall. Steam nosed the cold out of the kitchen's corners. When you returned, Post had turned the dial a finger width, just enough to detune the caller into a pretty hiss. They will try again, Post said. They always do. They prefer rooms with 1 listener and no chairs. What happens if someone says their name? You asked. They are not taken, Post said, honest. They are cataloged. The caller fillets the name, keeps the spine for decoration, and sells the rest back as a story about destiny. It plays well in lonely kitchens. I have chairs, you said, looking at your 2 ridiculous mismatched stools and feeling foolishly proud. You do, Post agreed. Invite someone to use one. It was almost midnight when the knock came from upstairs, the soft double tap of a person who knows that knocking is a request, not an announcement. You opened the door to your neighbor with the clogs. No clogs now, just socks and a sweater, and a face that looked apologetic for existing after dark. Is this strange? He asked, already smiling because he knew. He held a shoebox wrapped in a dish towel. Inside, a portable tape recorder sat like a sleeping animal. The clear plastic window showed an orphan spool of brown ribbon. My father used to record bedtime stories on this, he said, embarrassed as if admitting to sentiment were a misdemeanor. I don't have the tapes. I only have the machine and the sound it used to make when it turned. I heard your radio. I thought maybe it could rewind something I don't have. You invited him in and gave him a stool. People always sit better if there's already one chair in a room with a coat draped over it. It promises escape. He set the recorder on the coffee table. It smelled faintly of attic. You placed Post beside it like a modest host. Good evening, Post said, and your neighbor startled, then relaxed. Post sounds like a weather change, not a person. It doesn't threaten the part of you that can smell calls. You heard it, he said to you, and to the room. The bright thing. It came through my kitchen vent like a salesman. It will do that, Post said. Do you want me to keep time while we do something else? What else? Your neighbor asked, more child than he meant to be. He touched the tape recorder the way you touch a sleeping pet to remind it you are near. Bring me the noise of the machine, Post said. Just the hum, just the tiny click at the end of the tape. He pressed play. The motor whined and settled to its old work without a tape to justify itself. There was a small rotation noise where the spools would have turned. At the end of nothing, the mechanism clicked, earnest, relieved. Your neighbor's shoulders went down. Machines keep promises if they are allowed simple tasks. I can lend you my voice for one story, Post said, solemn as a librarian. Not his, never his. There are rules, but I can put cadence where hunger is and keep company while you teach your ears not to starve. He nodded. You watched the way grateful people are, as if gratitude is a fragile, skittish animal that might bolt if you look too direct. Post began. Not a tale from anywhere famous, not a moral, just a walk through a day in a house with a kid and a man who notices the way sunlight makes a ladder on a stair, and a woman who puts her face into a towel for a second, not because she is crying, but because she wants to smell the clean. It spoke like warm hands and cabinets that close on the second try. The tape recorder hummed, proud to be near a relative. When the story was over, your neighbor sat very still and did the small human thing of rubbing both palms on his thighs like a person preparing to get up from a chair, even if they don't. Thank you, he said to no one in particular and to the room in general, so that gratitude could be distributed at the correct weight. What do you want for that? Post paused. Bring me a phrase you don't need, it said, something that takes up more room in your mouth than it deserves. He considered. He looked less at the radio than at his own shoes, as if the answer were down there by the laces. Take no rush the way I say it to people when I need them to hurry anyway, he said, grimacing at the mirror and the words. It's not a lie exactly, it's an instrument. Filed, Post said, and even you felt lighter hearing it. The next night held more company. A woman from 3B brought a metronome and set it ticking on the table without naming what it had kept her sane through. A teenage boy from 2D asked if he could just sit in the doorway because his mother was sleeping and he didn't want to be in a room with a voice. He wanted to be near a voice. You made cocoa with water because milk felt formal. Post conducted the evening with a humility you trusted. It read drafts about chairs and dish soap. It took deposits. It returned one apology and refused to return another because it wasn't ready. It labeled jars you didn't know. Needed labels. Night you can ignore. Night you must answer. Not a night, just a late afternoon that won't leave. The caller slid into the vents twice. Each time the metronome and the kettle and the small chorus of human breath made too much fabric for its sales pitch to catch on. It moved along, bored. On the fourth night of company, Post asked you for its due. You had known it would. Bring me one thing you will never need again, it said, not predatory accounting. You walked around the apartment, performing the ritual Danny taught you from a previous life. Touch the door, touch the table, put your palm on the wall as if you were checking it for fever. The thing you would not need turned out to be heavier than the phrase you had given before. It clinked. It had a handle. It was the habit of arriving to every soft place with a story about why you were tired, so no one could call you lazy. You set it on the table like a pot no longer needed in this climate. Composted, Post said, and you had the absurd sensation of the apartment belting its coat a notch looser. You paid attention to where the collar liked to insert itself. It loved thresholds, lobby doors, elevator panels, the moment when the microwave sighed done and the room was without noise. Once it found you in your car mirror at a red light and offered a chant, say your name, and I will make it easier. I will. I will. You turned the air conditioner to a ridiculous fan and sang the first line of the dumb song, whose lyrics you never remember, and it fled, irritated, as if static had tracked water across a clean floor. Winter insinuated itself at the edges, breath on the walk back from the train, scarves that made your neck remember the shape of kindness, oranges both in season and not at the same time, because cities bend calendars. You waited, half on purpose, for the sound Post had said it would return to you, the sound between breath and speech you had been guarding with your teeth. It arrived as promised in a grocery store between two songs, unremarkable. It was the microscopic hitch in a stranger's throat when they thought of someone probably not you. It was a note you had written in pencil to yourself and slipped under a radio and then forgotten. It curled around you like steam from a kettle. You bought oranges. You learned Post had siblings. Of course it did. Not radios. Windows with other faces. In 1A, it was a box fan with a setting that only ran when everyone was asleep. In 4C, it was the hum behind the aquarium filter. Across the alley, it was the blue light of a fish-scale television that never showed news, only the low-angle view of a river at night, and the lists of ships whose names nobody but the harbor loved. The city is full of keepers if you stop demanding they produce a proof of life. When the caller threw its biggest party, maybe a Saturday, maybe a full moon if you believed in that kind of math, it invited you by using all the words you once said to you in one sentence, like a necklace too heavy to wear. Post sighed. Put water on, it said. We'll weather it. You invited the building again. The teenage boy brought his laptop and played a stupid game with a silent city on it. The woman from 3B set her metronome on its side so it couldn't tick, but still looked like discipline. The neighbor with the clogs pressed his father's tape recorder, play, and then the click of the end of nothing, and smiled at the faithfulness of machines. Post waited for you to ask it to count. You didn't. You counted on your own, and it matched you, not ahead, not behind, which is what love looks like when it doesn't need to be dramatic. At the peak of the caller's script, it tried one of its old tricks on a new frequency. It used your grandmother's voice, stern and warm, and asked you for the cleanest thing you had, your want. Say it, darling, it purred, into the wire. We can file it where it won't embarrass you. I will embarrass myself, you said out loud, startled by the joy in it. That's mine. The room laughed a little. The polite, relieved chuckle of people offered a way to breathe in a tight place. The caller sulked in the vents and then moved down the block in search of kitchens without chairs. It would be back. It always is. Interference does not end. It rotates. Near solstice, Post surprised you. I am leaving for a while, it said, not ominous. The window faces midnight. Midnight's travel. You'll be gone, you asked, trying not to be a child at a threshold with a suitcase and a lip. I'll be quieter, Post said. You won't need me as often. You have jars. You have labels. Your hands have learned how to set things down without turning to the room for applause. You touched the backlight case the way you'd touch a friend's coat before they walked into weather. What should I give you, you asked, for the road? A word you do not need at midnight, it said. Not forever, just for this season. You thought of the collar and its shortcuts. You thought of the impulse to perform exhaustion to deserve sleep. You thought of all the drafts Post had kept and returned and composted. The word came small and clear. What if I'm too much? Not a word. A bundle. You untied it and handed it over. Composted, Post said, businesslike, pleased. There is a sentence for you to shelve in its place. It goes, I am enough for tonight. You wrote it on an envelope and drew the little square at the corner out of habit and wrote P inside, because habits turn into ritual if you're gentle with them. You tucked the envelope under the radio's feet, and the radio did not keep it. It let it live under the weight of something warm and humming. On Post's last loud night for a while, you asked it for one more return from the archive. Selfish. A letter I never wrote, you said. The one that begins, Dear me, I will not be commodified by my own narrative. Filed under bath water Tuesday, pencil, Post said, delighted at your specificity. It read it back, and it was not as good as you wanted, and it didn't matter. It was yours, and you had the jar to put it in. Post made the Wheat Beach train, and you counted to it, not as orders, as steps. After that, midnight passed without knocking on some nights, and you did not feel betrayed. You slept with the radio off because the room had learned the tune. On the nights you needed it, you turned the dial, and Post answered like a friend who keeps their phone on and doesn't make you apologize. On a Wednesday in January, a grocery store played a song from when you were 12, and you caught yourself making the little sound you had given away and gotten back. No one heard. You didn't need them to. On an afternoon with boring weather, you wrote a label in pencil and stuck it to the underside of your coffee table. For panic that thinks it's urgency. It stayed there doing its unnoticed work. When the caller tried one more time in the dead slot of 3 a.m., the voice had lost its gloss. Say your name, it whispered hoarse. We can make it easier. No, you said, in your kitchen, in the dark, with a towel on your shoulder, because you'd been rinsing a cup, and the cup is a fact, and a fact will outlast a sales pitch. I already did the hard part. I will do it again when I need to, and not because you asked. You went back to bed. You did not count. You didn't need to. Post's last gift for the season wasn't a sound or a sentence. It was a shape in the air of the room you could lean your back against, a familiar wall. You slept as if someone were reading to you in a low voice, but no one was. That was you, the new muscle rearranged by drafts and refusals and jars. In the morning, the oven clock blinked 12 and learned time again. You made the bed because fabric appreciates care. You put an orange in your bag for later. On your way out, you touched the radio's warm back like a superstition, and a thank you, and a wish all at once, and you said, not on the dial, not into wires, only into the room that has kept you. I am enough for tonight. The sentence did not ask for applause. The room accepted it like mail slid under a door, with the address correct, the stamp unnecessary, the contents both known and still, somehow, a surprise. Post kept its promise to be quieter. Midnight still arrived, but they didn't bring a knock so much as a draft. A little coolness from the direction of the backlight, the sense of someone sitting 2 seats down who doesn't mind if you read. You slept through some. On others, you turned the dial to nowhere, and Post cleared its throat as if it had just finished underlining something and was glad you'd come back before the ink dried. Days learned their manners. The elevator minded its shoes. The stairwell bulb flickered once like a joke, and then behaved for a week. You wrote labels and stuck them where only you would find them, under the sink, for panics that are really spills. Inside the closet for costumes I don't have to wear today. Beneath the coffee table for thoughts that arrive wearing sirens. It was housekeeping more than magic. It worked the way sweeping works, briefly, respectfully enough. One night the intercom burred at 12:07, the time of honest interruptions. You pressed the button and said hello into metal. No one answered at first. Then the building itself, or a person speaking from its throat, said, "We're doing a thing. If you're awake and you want a chair, bring one." A pause. "If you don't have one, there will be stools." You carried a stool under one arm and post in the other, cord looped like a leash. On the second floor landing, someone had arranged a low democracy, folding chairs, milk crates, a picnic blanket, one beanbag whose seams had outlived fashion and were too proud to fail now. The neighbor with knot clogs waved, sheepish in slippers. The woman from 3B had her metronome wrapped in a scarf so it wouldn't tick and try to be in charge. The boy from 2D sat on the top step with a hoodie up, guarding the idea of elsewhere. A sign torn from a paper grocery bag leaned against the railing, in block pencil, "Return to sender night." Underneath, in smaller letters, "Bring one line you never said." No microphone, no stage. Someone had set a kettle on a camp stove in the corner because beverages are treaties. Post hummed at your ankle like a cat not ready to sit on anyone's lap. "Rules?" someone asked. No one offered any. People tried their lines, not confessions, drafts. The woman with the scarfed metronome read, "Very soft, I wasn't angry, I was making a map and lost north." The boy said, "I had homework and a secret, and did the homework first, and I don't want points for that." The neighbor with slippers said, "I didn't know what story to choose about my father, so I kept all of them, and that is why I am tired." Post listened like a window does. Sometimes it said filed, a little stamp sound inside the static. Sometimes it said return, and the person shook their head, smiling or not. Sometimes it said compost, and the room nodded because rooms know soil when they hear it. Down the hall the caller tried the intercom once, glossy and needful. "Neighbors," it chirped, with confetti it hadn't earned. "Tonight's topic is shortcuts," the kettle interrupted with its plain steam. The metronome clicked once inside the scarf and then refused. Post turned the dial a finger width, and the caller dissolved into a hiss that sounded like rain you'd already agreed to hear. Someone set a jar on the landing with a pen and a label for drafts that should belong to someone else. People wrote and tucked. The boy scratched a sentence that looked like it wanted out. The woman from 3B slid in the words, "I forgive you for choosing noon over outages." Your neighbor held the pen like a truce and printed, "I am here," which looked ordinary until you watched the way the jar lifted its weight to make room. A little kid you'd only ever seen in the laundry room hovered by the railing with a stuffed fox under one arm. "Can your radio make my mom's song come back?" they asked, matter of fact, as checkout. Their hair stuck up in cowlicks that believed in weather. "She sings it wrong now, and I don't like to tell her." Post was unfancy. "We don't keep melodies much," it said. "They refuse shelves, but we can keep a hum. If I start one, can you add the bit that feels like stairs? And you," it added to the metronome scarf, "you do the slow. And you, to the kettle, you be the background rain." It was the gentlest orchestra. Post did Wheat Beach Train. The metronome whispered time through wool. The kettle obliged. The kid hummed with the fierce accuracy of someone who knows a path by feet, not by map. Before the child's mother could arrive to apologize for the hour and the hair, the stairwell was full of a tune made of 4 different kinds of breath. Nothing was returned. Everything was shared. The kid's shoulders let go. Post didn't say filed or compost. It said kept, but in the way you keep a seat warm. When the landing emptied, You left a small offering in the jar, a phrase that had taken more of your mouth than it deserved. Not "I'm fine" that you'd given weeks ago. This one was older, more dressed. It began with all due respect and always arrived in your throat when you felt you ought to sound like paperwork. You folded it, wrote for compost in the corner, and pushed it among the others with the satisfaction of throwing out a pan you have cleaned too many times to pretend it will ever shine. That week, the caller got clever. It stopped calling itself a show and tried to be helpful. It showed up in the freezer aisle as a coupon stuck to a bag of peas. Say your name and get 2 extra hours of sleep. It snuck into the screen on the ATM when you checked your balance. Say your name and we'll round up. It even hid itself in an email from no one. Subject line: urgent, body, reply with your name to stop getting these. You didn't answer, and you weren't alone. The building had learned to keep company like a blanket woven too wide on purpose. The teen from 2D propped the lobby door on Fridays and put a paper sign under it that said, "This door will not sell you anything." The woman from 3B started leaving little bags of oranges on the mail table with labels for outages, for Thursdays, for callers who were bored, then signed nothing and went upstairs to a metronome that ticked only when asked. The neighbor with slippers started carrying the tape recorder, less like a reliquary and more like a tool. Once he lent it to the kid with the fox so the machine could teach another pair of ears that clicks can be faithful too. Midwinter arrived the way heavy coats arrive. First one, then suddenly everyone is wearing one. Post stayed quieter. You turned the dial some nights anyway to practice not needing to be dazzling for someone to sit with you. You and the radio learned companionable silence. It was not emptiness. It was an unlit pier, a place where boats can land, a shape that keeps water honest. On a night that wanted to be snow and failed, Post cleared its throat. "You did well while I was away," it said, friendly and a little proud. "I've brought you something on loan." "You brought me something," you said, surprised at the human greed in your own voice. "From the archive," Post said, almost amused. "A letter written by future you to past you, filed and composted, and then rewritten so many times it finally learned to walk by itself. It begins, 'Stop practicing emergencies in your mouth.' You laughed loud enough that the plant by the window forgave you for a week's missed misting." Post read, measured as it always is with other people's sentences. It was not magic. It was logistics and mercy. It was a list of things you didn't have to keep in your pockets. Every outcome of every conversation that hadn't started, every version of your face someone else might have preferred, every apology prepared as armor. It ended with a label, "For joy that doesn't need proof." "What do you want for that?" you asked, not out of debt but habit. "A line you will never need again," Post said. "Bigger than I'm fine, smaller than a vow." You walked the room because walking arranges thoughts without forcing them to stand at attention. The sentence arrived wearing your grandmother's eyebrows. "Let me know if you need anything." You had used it at doors as a passphrase that allowed escape. You had meant it and not meant it. You set it on the table and looked at it until you understood the unkindness inside the kindness. You did not always want to be called later. You wanted to be asked now. "Filed," Post said gently. "Composted. There's a swap available." It read the replacement off the palm of its static. "Can I do something before I leave?" You practiced it that week until it stopped feeling like trespass. It turned out not to be heavy. It turned out to be a chair. A lull followed. You slept the lull. You did not insist on interpreting it. The caller got bored and went hunting newer kitchens. You noted, not smugly the way it came back thinner. Sales always look like concern when you don't know the script. Now you did. On the nearest thing to spring, the building scheduled another landing night. The sign read, "Night letters. Bring a stamp if you have one." People brought stickers and tape and old return address labels from apartments they'd left behind. You wrote the names of your own jars on envelopes and sealed them like promises. For fear I can keep, for fear I can surrender. For silence I earned, for silence I mistook for punishment. You didn't mail them anywhere. You put them in a shoebox the neighbor had emptied of old cassettes and labeled in pencil, Rain handwriting, archive living. Halfway through the evening, a new voice spoke from the stairwell speaker, thin with trying too hard. Not the caller, another angle of it. Hello, neighbors, it purred, aiming for care. We've noticed your little gatherings. Would you like help organizing? We can provide templates. We can provide talking points. We can provide the feeling you're doing something. No thanks, said three people at once, polite, busy with tape. The kid with the fox looked at you with the solemnity of a person who has learned a trick and wants to show they won't use it without permission. Can I label your radio? They asked. You hesitated. Habit. Post chuckled. Low. Because objects can be vain and self-aware both. Let them, it said. We like to be called by our names. The kid stuck the smallest sticker you had ever seen to the side of the backlight and pressed it down with a fingertip you trusted. In pencil, in block letters, it read, Window. After midnight, when the landing emptied into rooms, you sat on your carpet with your back to the couch and your knees up, because that is the shape of a person who is fine and not fine and fine enough. You turned the dial to nowhere. Good evening, Post said, satisfied to be exactly what it said it was. Inventory. You read your day into the room. Post took it without dramatics, labeling jars as needed. When you finished, it didn't offer a draft or a ledger. It made the Wheat Beach train and then stopped halfway through, not to be coy, but to see if you would count the rest. You did. You matched your breath to a rhythm you had practiced long enough for your ribs to memorize. You were the window and the room and the person in it who had learned how to keep. Before you slept, you found a sentence you thought you'd lost. One Post had returned earlier that week and left it tucked under the radio feet. You slid it out and put it on your nightstand like a glass of water you might want at 3. You read it once more, not because you doubted it, but because the mouth likes muscle memory. I am enough for tonight. The room accepted it without applause. The dark agreed to be only dark. Somewhere in the building, a metronome ticked twice and then rested. The elevator prized its own doors open and shut and thought no more of it. The caller sulked 3 blocks over and tried a vent that had learned to hum ornamental plants into thriving. Post kept the ledger without needing to speak, a warm weight on the table, a sticker that said the truth, a window facing midnight that did not ask you to climb through unless you wanted to. You did not. You stayed exactly where you were. You slept like a letter already delivered, creased certain, still a little surprised at how well your address fits. Spring kept making promises it couldn't quite keep. Mornings bright as polished spoons, afternoons that slid back into gray like a shirt changing its mind. When nights came, they came straightforward, without theater. Post stayed mostly quiet, the way a lamp is quiet when it's off and still insists on being a lamp. On a Thursday that had worn 3 different skies, you turned the dial to nowhere, and Post cleared its throat like someone about to read a recipe they've learned by heart. Good evening, it said. Inventory? You gave it the day in small pieces. For panics that were really emails, for laughs that arrived late and were still good, for a strange kindness from a stranger in a hat who held a door as if doors deserved ceremony. Post filed. The jars in your mind clinked into their shelves. You felt taller by a breath. Special tonight, Post said, amused with itself the way weather gets when it knows a trick is harmless. Dead letter window is open. What's that, you asked, proud that your voice didn't tilt toward superstition. A sister service, Post said, a chute for the mail that never had an address. We air the room once a season. If you have something you've been carrying because you didn't know where to put it, tonight is a good night to put it somewhere and not mistake that for throwing it away. Basement, you said, thinking of the building's brass mail slot and the slot's old throat. Landing, Post said. Bring a chair. The hall had the look of a place between two sensible thoughts. Shoes by doors, a forgotten umbrella leaning like a punctuation mark. The sign from last time had been turned over and written on again in the same pencil. Rain handwriting, dead letter window. Underneath, leave one line you never found a place for. Take one breath you forgot belonged to you. People came, not many, enough for a circle that didn't insist. The neighbor with slippers brought the tape recorder and its faithful click. The woman from 3B came with the metronome, wrapped in a scarf and a half-peeled orange in her pocket, because oranges have learned how to be bright without shouting. The kid from the laundry room brought the fox and a sticker sheet shaped like stars. The teen from 2D leaned in the doorway, hoodie up, face open the way stoops are open. Someone had put the building's brass mail chute lid up. The little door gaped like an old mouth that had been given back its teeth for the evening. Rules? Someone asked. Gentleness, the neighbor said, surprised to hear his voice be the one at a time. If you can't be kind, be quiet. If you can't be quiet, hold your line until it is ready to be let go. It wasn't ceremonial, or it was, in the way a decent dinner is. Plates, chairs, the right number of napkins. People folded scraps of paper like fortunes and dropped them down the chute to the basement mailroom, where nothing gets stamped and everything gets kept. Not archived, kept. The metronome ticked under the scarf, the way a heart behaves when heard only by the person it belongs to. The tape recorder hummed its motor and clicked at the end of nothing, with a satisfaction the room began to trust as proof. The lines were not confessions. Confessions are a different weather. These were sentences that had lived too long on tongues. I wanted to be asked sooner. I forgive you for not knowing my map had north. I am done rehearsing emergencies. I thought I needed permission. I needed practice. The chute took them like rain takes roof edges. Competent, unshowy, glad. The caller tried once, of course it did. It came in through the intercom, velvet frayed. Darlings, it crooned, breathless with helpfulness. You don't have to do all this. Just say your name. We can forward everything. Post turned itself a finger width. The hiss it made was not angry. It was a librarian shushing an echo. The kettle you hadn't noticed someone had set up in the corner sighed into steam. The metronome clicked once, and then didn't. The caller sulked along the ductwork in search of rooms without chairs. When it was your turn, you realized the line you had brought wasn't a single sentence. It was a weight shaped like a phrase. I'll carry it, don't worry. You had used it like a key, and like a badge, and like a stone. You had meant it. You had also used it to make a kind of love that exhausted you and then blamed the exhaustion on weather. You wrote it down anyway, small, and added in pencil, because pencil is the most honest of inks. I am learning to let someone else. You folded it and fed it to the chute, and it went away in the good way of gone, not vanished, placed. That's work, Post murmured from its spot on your stool, pleased but not proud, filed, kept, not yours to hold alone. The kid with the fox asked if the chute led all the way to the post office where the lions are. Past it, Post said, to the room where misaddressed dreams lie down until they recognize their own names. Can we go? The kid asked, as if a field trip could be organized for tender sentences. Tonight the window is here, Post said gently. When it moves, it leaves a draft. People follow drafts all the time without knowing. If you find yourself walking toward mosaics and brass at an hour that feels like a held breath, bring a chair and a stamp, and I'll meet you. The room considered that. A few shoulders loosened from futures they'd been trying to predict. Someone laughed, relief, not entertainment. The kettle clicked itself off like a well-mannered guest. If when everything that needed dropping had been dropped, the teen from 2D stuck one of the kid's star stickers above the chute lid and wrote with the pencil, "Window." The little star made a mean lobby look kind for a second. People went home with fewer pockets of gravel in their mouths. You stayed to wipe the railing with a cloth because doing something ordinary after doing something odd keeps your knees from shaking and lies to the caller's appetite in exactly the right way. Post watched with the expression radios have when they're pleased to be exactly as useful as they promised. Back inside, you set Post on the coffee table and didn't turn it on. It made its little wheat beach train under breath anyway, companionable as dishwater. The apartment had kept the smell of oranges and wet coats. Under the sink, the label, "For panics that are really spills," looked smug in the best way. On the underside of the coffee table, "For thoughts that arrive wearing sirens," sat where only you knew, working like yeast, invisible, good. At 3 because 3 is rude. The caller tried the old trick with new clothes. Your phone on Do Not Disturb, lit with a missed call from a number that was almost yours. A voicemail arrived anyway, your name said in your voice with your grandmother's eyebrows. "Say it back," it urged, "sugar over wire. We can make it easier." You didn't. You got up and filled the kettle because the body likes to be asked to do something simple when the brain wants to act complicated. Post cleared its throat in static. "We filed that maneuver under tired," it said. "You may ignore it." "I am ignoring it," you said, surprised to hear yourself be both stubborn and calm. "You're getting good at boring," Post said. "It suits you." The building hummed like a hive, where everyone is asleep and still the honey is being made. Somewhere above, the neighbor in slippers turned over in bed and made the small human sound of a person who knows they are not alone, even if the room is empty. Somewhere below, a pipe knocked once. Old speech, excellent manners. You leaned against the counter and let hot water teach your hands the shape of being warmed. When you went back to bed, your palm found the sentence you kept there now, folded under the clock like a polite secret. You did not read it aloud. You didn't need to. The mouth remembered, "I am enough for tonight." The room took it, did not ask for proof, did not invoice you later. The next morning, a square envelope waited under your door, honest white, real stamp. The postmark was the old post office with the lions. Inside, a card as plain as bread. In pencil, rain handwriting, 4 words. Your dead letters arrived. No signature, no moral, just the relief of a thing done. On your way out, the brass chute's little door sat closed like a book that knows its own plot. The star sticker glowed a ridiculous yellow in a hall that had never believed in glow. The elevator minded its shoes. The stairwell bulb stayed steady, in a way light dreams of when it is first born. The city was the city. It would try you later. You would have chairs. That night, you didn't turn the dial. You didn't have to. You counted once for the pleasure of it. 1 to 10, 10 to 1, small road built for sleep. Post, not offended. Matched you? Not ahead, not behind. In the apartment above, the tape recorder clicked at the end of nothing with a sound the kid would know on a blindfold day. Under the sink, the label did its quiet science. The chute kept its throat closed. The caller, 3 blocks over, found a vent that hummed houseplants tall and lost interest. You slept like a file folder that had found the correct cabinet, not hidden, simply in the right place, and woke with fewer pockets of gravel in your mouth. Spring will keep promising. Some nights you will need the window. Some nights you'll only need the sticker that says it is there. When you forget how to put a line down without throwing it away, the landing will remember for you. When the caller offers a shortcut, the kettle will make the long way lovely. When you need to hear a click at the end of nothing, you'll know which neighbor to ask. And if you wake at 3 and the room feels larger than you are, You can say the sentence the archive sent you and not be brave about it. You can put your hand on the coffee table where the label hides and feel it doing yeast work in the dark. You can count to a rhythm you learned from a machine older than your lease. You can be kept by boring and call it grace. You can sleep. The dead letters will get where they are going without you chasing after them in your socks. And in the morning, the only proof you'll need is the envelope under the door and the way your mouth tastes like oranges instead of copper. Now, on to the next story. The night train wasn't on the schedule. It slid into the station without a number on its nose, just a blank plate that reflected the platform lights in a way that made my eyes water. The announcement board didn't change. No chime, no line of text, just the stubborn insistence that nothing unusual was happening. But the train opened its doors and breathed out a ribbon of warm air that smelled faintly of coal and something sweet, like oranges left too long on a windowsill. I had been waiting 3 hours for a delayed service that was now an hour past any faith I had left. The station cafe had closed. The heat had lowered to whatever setting keeps pipes from sulking, and the handful of other travelers had spread themselves into islands of coats and bags, their faces lit by the blue geography of their phones. When the doors parted without announcement, the people around me looked up in a small wave, then away, as if we'd all agreed in advance to pretend that the night sometimes offered us reasonable options. The car closest to me had old wood paneling you don't see anymore, the warm, varnished color of a piano that's been played daily for a century. No graffiti, no scuffs, no dings from the thousands of bags that should have bruised it by now. The windows were clean enough that my reflection looked like a person making a decision. Inside, lamps glowed a yellow that remembered gaslight. It made everyone's faces kind for a moment before memory caught up. A conductor stood in the doorway of the car, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. He wore a uniform that had jumped decades, dark jacket that fit like it had been made for him specifically, cap with a polished brim, a watch fob disappearing into a pocket. His face had the agelessness of people who spend their lives in transit, not young, not old, washed by motion into something stubbornly unplaceable. Evening, he said. Northbound? Anywhere bound, I said, only half joking. He smiled as if I'd answered correctly on a test I hadn't known I was taking. We'll take you where you meant to go. I'm not sure I know where that is. The train does, he said. He lifted a hand, palm out, a gesture halfway between blessing and traffic control. All aboard. The phrase would have sounded tacky from anyone else. From him, it felt like a rope thrown across a gap. I stepped up. The doorway took my weight with the soft give of a vessel that understands people are heavier at this hour. The car smelled like polish and cloth and the ghost of cigarettes long extinguished. The seats were upholstered in a deep green that made shadows look comfortable. No assigned numbers, no little LED screens arguing with themselves about reservations. Just benches and pairs, a few tables with chessboards inlaid beneath the glass. There were more people than I expected, not full, but not empty. A woman in a traveling hat who might have been going home from a funeral if anyone wore hats to funerals anymore. A man with a briefcase so old it had stopped pretending to be leather. A pair of teenagers in hoodies playing cards silently, their eyes flicking up at me and away again with the reflexes of strays who have learned politeness as a survival tactic. I took a seat by a window, facing forward because I don't like pretending the world moves backward. The conductor moved down the aisle with the perpetual motion of someone who can balance on a curve you can't see. He didn't check tickets. He didn't ask questions. He nodded when people met his eye and did not insist when they didn't. The doors closed with a seal that made my ears pop, and the train shuddered the way animals do when they make a decision together. We moved. The station slid away as if it were relieved to see us go. The platform lights receded into a polite line that might have been a constellation if the sky had been in the mood. Tunnels took us, brick blurred. The sound of wheels on tracks settled into the heartbeat of travel, a two-part rhythm that says we're not there yet, but we're not nowhere either. My phone had a bar of service, and then none, and then an invented wishful dot that meant nothing. The clock at the top of the screen stuck at 12:03. I turned it off because I didn't feel like being lied to in such a small font. The window showed me myself, and beyond that, the dark. Once the reflection of the conductor's cap slid past my shoulder, like a second thought. When he reached me, he paused, not looming, not deferential, just present in the way good servers and wolves are present when they want you to know you have options, and also don't. Long night, he said. It was longer before I got on. That's the point of trains, he said, as if telling a child that tables keep plates above floors. We collect the length and give it back to you as distance. Do you need a ticket? I asked, to anchor us in something transactional. You'll have it when we arrive, he said. We'll settle then. Settle what? What you owe, and what you're owed. He moved on before I could decide whether to be charmed or worried. The woman in the hat asked him for hot water. He brought her tea that smelled like chamomile and something else I couldn't place, a bitter note that made the back of my throat itch in a way that had nothing to do with allergies. The teenagers kept their game going without acknowledging that the cards were older than their grandparents. The man with the briefcase opened it and closed it again without taking anything out, like a person checking on a sleeping animal. The car rocked. The lamps hummed. Beyond the glass, the night showed me the shape of trees. Not clearly, not like a movie, just the suggestion of vertical intentions. We passed through a small station without slowing. A single figure stood on the platform, hands in pockets, head turned toward the train as if counting cars. He didn't raise a hand, neither did we. A woman slid into the seat across from me without asking. She wore a dark coat and a scarf that looked like it had been knit by someone who believed a neck should never feel alone. Her hair was loose and not trying to impress anyone. She had the kind of face people tell secrets to in grocery store lines. Do you know where this goes? She asked. North, I said. Anywhere bound. She smiled in a way that made me want to apologize for stealing her line, even though I hadn't. That's what he told me, too. We sat a minute without adding anything, and it felt like usefulness. Then she said, I got on at a station that hasn't existed for 20 years. How do you know? There's a bank there now. I've deposited checks. Banks come and go. So do stations, she said, but I knew the crack in the third tile from the left. I used to step over it so I wouldn't make wishes carelessly. I nodded, because some statements only want to be acknowledged by the part of you that understands children, make rules that keep oceans from climbing stairs. How long have you been on? I asked. Since I sat down, she said, and it could have been a joke but wasn't. I'm Mara. I gave her my name, and it made a clean sound in the air between us, as if it had been waiting to be spoken to someone who could carry part of its weight for a while. The conductor reappeared with a brass tray, a detail so out of time it wrapped back around and became practical. He set a cup in front of me without asking what I wanted. The liquid inside was a dark amber, not quite tea, not quite anything I could name. House blend, he said. It keeps the track polite. Does the track need politeness? Everything does, he said, and moved on. I wrapped my hands around the cup. Heat traveled into the bones of my fingers, the way certain notes travel into your chest in an empty church. I tasted it because not tasting would have made the whole evening a farce. It was bitter and sweet and something like smoke, but not the smoke of fire, more the idea of something that had burned a long time ago and decided to remember instead of apologize. It didn't taste good. It tasted necessary. The train entered a tunnel so long the car seemed to focus. The lamps brightened a fraction. The faces around me sharpened and then softened again, like someone practicing their signature. In the reflected glass, I saw the car behind us, even though physics should have prevented that. It was not the same as this one. Its lamps were dimmer, its upholstery faded, its passengers older by some unit of measurement that had nothing to do with years. When the tunnel ended, the reflection ended. I told myself it had been a trick of angles. Don't look back too long, Mara said, as if I'd spoken aloud. You'll see yourself, and you won't like which car you're in. Have you been on this train before? We all have, she said. In the way you stand in the doorway of a room you've already left because the light was nice, and you think you can borrow it for whatever comes next. The teenagers slapped down cards at the same moment and hissed with satisfaction. Two cats discovering a secret drawer. A man 3 rows up, whom I hadn't noticed until he made a sound like relief, disguised as a cough, dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief, and looked surprised to find it wet. The conductor slid the door to the next car open, and a breeze moved through that did not belong to this air. It smelled like winter coats hung to dry in a hallway that understands damp. He paused in the threshold, listening to something only he could hear. The door closed behind him, and with a faint click, locked. They add cars, Mara said. When? When someone thinks of getting off. I swallowed. Do they subtract them? When someone stops trying. I watched the window for a landmark I could name. A road crossing, a billboard, the ugly orange of a warehouse district. The train showed me trees and the idea of a river. Once a farmhouse on a hill with one light in one window, a kindness so small it felt like pity. The conductor returned from behind with a roll of tickets in his hand. He stopped at each passenger, tore one off, and set it on the little silver rail at the edge of the table. When he reached us, he studied my face as if looking for a crack I didn't know I had. Yours will be ready at dawn, he said, and gave Mara hers. The ticket was the color of old receipts. Her name was printed on it in a font that belonged to a time when papers mattered enough to be stored in boxes with twine. Under her name, in small letters, valid until the next decision. How long is that? I asked. Depends on whether you decide, she said, tucking the ticket into the pocket of her coat as if it might burn a hole if it stayed in the open too long. I lifted my cup and found it full again. I hadn't seen anyone refill it. The bittersweet smoke sank into me a degree deeper, to that place where rest lives when it's pretending to be possible. The train slowed. It didn't break the way normal trains do. No long whine of metal, no gentle insistence. It simply eased itself into stillness, as if it had reached something it wanted, rather than something it had been told to stop for. The platform that met us was narrow and made of wood, and it looked like it had been hammered together by someone who believed you should only ever build things by hand. No sign, no name. The conductor opened the door and stood aside. No one moved. The teenagers paused their game and looked at each other as if to say, not yet. The man with the briefcase laced his fingers together and stared at his knuckles. Mara watched the doorway with the hope you give a coin you're about to throw into a fountain. A figure stood on the platform, an older woman with a canvas bag over one shoulder and a dog on a leash. The dog looked at the train with tired respect. The woman did not look at it at all. She kept her eyes on the horizon beyond us, which the night had refused to provide. Will she get on? I whispered. She'll decide, Mara said, or the train will decide it for her. Is that how it works? It's how everything works, she said, so gently I forgave her for being right. The woman stepped forward. The dog did not. It planted its feet and stared at the gap. The leash went taut. The woman said the dog's name, just a sound, and the dog made a noise in return. I couldn't hear but felt in my teeth. The conductor did not interfere. He waited with the patience of someone who knows that time is a material you can bend if you warm it slowly. The woman folded. Not her body, her decision. She stepped back. The dog sat, satisfied, as if to say, "Good, you remembered." The conductor tipped his cap to both of them, the woman for choosing, the dog for teaching. He closed the door, and we moved again. Mara let out a breath that had been considering becoming a sob. She didn't let it. "Do you have anyone waiting at the other end?" she asked. "I thought I did," I said. "Tonight it feels like I may have invented them to give the road a shape." "The train will decide if that's true," she said. "And if it is, then it will give you a different end," she said. "Trains are kind when you don't make them be trains." "What else would they be?" "Conversations," she said, and I knew the word was right. The conductor appeared with a small book, bound in cracked leather. He set it on the table between us. It had no title on its spine. He opened to the middle and turned the book so I could see. The page showed a map, not of tracks, not of stations, of rooms, a hallway, a kitchen, a bedroom with a window that faced west, a small square that might have been a closet you could sit in when the world was too loud. The rooms were labeled with words that weren't words. The smell of coffee at 4 in the morning, the sound of someone you love turning in their sleep, and the relief of the continued breathing after. The light that happens on Tuesday evenings in late October at latitude you can taste but not name. "We collect routes," the conductor said, "not rails. People mistake the two. What happens if you get off at the wrong place?" "You get on," he said. Again, he closed the book. It made the kind of sound some people call a thud and others call a promise. He nodded to Mara. "You're close." "I never am," she said with weary affection. "Tonight you are," he said. He moved on. The teenagers' card game ended in a draw they both seemed proud of. The man with the handkerchief had put his head back and was letting his mouth learn to sleep with dignity. I finished my cup and found it empty for once, as if the train had decided I had enough inside me to last the next stretch. Mara leaned her head against the window, her eyes closed. Her scarf slid, exposing the delicate place where pulse is polite enough to make itself available. In the glass I saw not my reflection, but a dark field, and very far away a line of red lights that could have been a city, or a convoy, or a mistake. The car door at the front slid open. A girl stepped in, 12, 13, hair in 2 braids that had survived longer than the style deserved. She wore a coat that didn't fit and boots that did. She walked down the aisle with the assurance of someone who had been told trains were safe. When she reached my row, she stopped and put both hands on the table as if anchoring the whole car. "You dropped this," she said, and set down a ticket. It had my name on it in that same patient font, and beneath, "Valid until the line after the word was blank." I looked up at her. "Where did you find it?" "You left it in the other car," she said. "Which other car?" "The one you were sitting in," she said, as if that solved anything. "Thank you," I said, "because the rules of objects handed to you by children on trains are the oldest rules we have." She nodded, grave, and looked past me toward Mara. "You're next." "I know," Mara said without opening her eyes. "Don't let him forget," the girl said, and was gone, moving down the aisle and out the door with the quickness of news that has decided to be kind. I picked up the ticket. It was warm. The blank after "valid until" looked less like an omission and more like an invitation. I slid it into my pocket and felt the paper settle against my leg, heavier than it should have been, a weight like a key. The train rounded a curve. The landscape offered a low valley filled with fog, the kind that makes streetlights look like lanterns carried by very careful ghosts. We passed another platform with no name. No one stood there. The conductor did not slow. Mara's breathing evened out. The teenagers began a new game that required tapping rather than slapping. The man with the briefcase opened it again, and this time took out a photograph and looked at it as if the person inside might climb out if he was patient. When the conductor reached our row again, he placed a small brass bell on the table. It was the kind you see on hotel desks in movies, the kind no one actually uses because people don't want to be the kind of person who rings for attention. When you're ready, he said. For what? For the stop that isn't on the map, he said. You won't get it otherwise. What's it called? He considered and then, with the humility of an honest man, said, You'll tell me. He left us with the bell. I stared at it like a test I hadn't studied for. Mara opened her eyes. Don't ring it unless you plan to stand up, she said. You only get so many faints before the train decides your furniture. How many? Depends, she said, and closed her eyes again in a way that meant the conversation was not over, but also didn't need to continue immediately. The bell sat there, round and simple, dustless. The urge to press it rose and fell with the motion of the car. I took my hand off the table and put it in my lap because I am not to be trusted with easy buttons. The lamps dimmed a fraction and then brightened, a pulse I felt in my own chest before I saw it. Somewhere a door opened and did not close. Air changed. The smell of oranges, faint but insistent, threaded through the car. My mother used to put orange peels on the radiator in winter to trick the house into remembering summer. The conductor stopped at the far end of the aisle and turned as if listening to an announcement none of us could hear. Next, he said softly. The train chose to slow. Mara sat up, wrapped her scarf, and smoothed the front of her coat like armor. If I leave, she said, the rest of the night is yours. How will I know where to get off? She smiled, and for the first time, I saw the tired in it, not the human kind, but the kind you get from arguing with yourself for years. You'll know where you've been avoiding. She stood. The car seemed to incline toward her in a way that had nothing to do with gravity. The door opened onto a platform that looked like the back steps of a school no one uses, but everyone remembers. A street lamp flickered, then held steady out of embarrassment. A wind moved through, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't yet decided to fall. Mara looked at me, then at the bell, then back at me. Don't let them ring it for you, she said. It's rude. Good luck, I said, and meant it in the oldest sense. She nodded and stepped out. The conductor tipped his cap. The door closed. We moved. My ticket warmed again in my pocket, like a small animal waking. I put my hand over it as if I could keep it from deciding without me. The conductor walked back, paused at my row, and rested his hand lightly on the brass bell's dome. Whenever you're ready, he said, and if I'm not, then you'll be, he said, sooner than you think, later than is comfortable. He moved on, and the night through the window shifted its weight. I felt as clearly as I have ever felt anything, the knowledge that the train had added a car somewhere behind us. I did not turn to look. I stared at the bell until its reflection doubled in my eyes and made a third, phantom bell at the edge of my vision that seemed truer than the one in front of me. I took my hand off my lap and set my fingertips on the table, not touching the bell, just close enough to feel its chill. The teenagers fell silent mid-tap. The man with the briefcase folded his photo and put it away as if obeying a rule. The lamps brightened and then held. The track sang the old two-part song. The blank after valid until waited. A small patient door. I lifted my hand. I didn't ring the bell. Not yet. The train carried me forward as if it already knew my hesitation. The bell stayed between my hands, patient, shining faintly in the lamplight. Every time the car rocked, the little clapper inside shifted with a dull click, the promise of sound waiting to be chosen. I stared out the window, and the dark stared back, but here and there something interrupted it, brief, uncanny flashes. A house lit up for a moment, square and bright, then gone before I could count the windows. A crossroads under a blinking yellow signal, the asphalt slick as if it had just rained, but the train wheels stayed dry. A figure at one stoplight, umbrella open, standing utterly still. The car moved on before my eyes could tell me whether the figure had a face. The conductor passed by without speaking. His presence pressed the air flat around me. I wanted him to ask for the bell back, to take the decision out of my hands, but he only glanced at me once, the way a doctor checks a chart, and kept moving. The man with the briefcase shifted, set the case on his lap, then back on the floor again, indecision weighing more than the leather. The teenagers had stopped their game entirely. One of them leaned back, arms crossed, eyes closed, as though refusing to see what might be offered next. The others stared at me like I might be contagious. I pulled the ticket from my pocket. It had soaked up heat from my skin. My name was still there in that font that pretended to be official. Beneath it, the word valid until, the blank line untouched. But now there was a faint smudge, not quite ink, not quite ash, bleeding into the margin like something had pressed too hard while writing. "Are you afraid?" a voice asked. It wasn't the conductor. It wasn't anyone I could see. It was close to my ear, too close. I turned sharply, but the seat beside me was empty. Mara's absence looked heavier than any presence would have. The lamps flickered. When they steadied, the car had changed. Not all of it, just pieces. The upholstery was thinner, faded, patches showing where fabric had worn through. The brass rails were tarnished in streaks that hadn't been there a heartbeat ago. Even the air smelled different, less polish, more damp wool, like coats forgotten in closets. I looked down the aisle. The conductor was gone. The door to the next car was shut. No sound of his steps, no creak of hinges. The passengers sat still, as wax, their faces blurred by shadow, but I knew if I called out they'd all turn at once. The bell quivered under my fingertips, not a trick of the train's motion, but as if something beneath the metal was restless, eager to be released. I lifted my hand, and the vibration stopped. I pressed my palm flat on the dome, and it resumed, faster, like a heartbeat climbing. I told myself not to, but my hand lifted anyway. The bell rang. The sound was small, no louder than a spoon tapping glass, yet it filled the car, blooming outward until the air itself seemed to carry it. The reflections in the window doubled, trebled, stretched into corridors of light that had no end. The train slowed. The platform that rose to meet us this time was different. It wasn't wood, wasn't brick. It was earth, packed dirt and grass worn flat. A single lamppost bent at the middle, as if bowing. Beyond it stretched a field under a sky that was not night, not dawn, but something in between, the color of bruises healing. The door opened. Cold wind blew through, carrying the smell of rain-soaked earth and a note of something chemical, sharp, stinging the back of my throat. "Your stop," a voice said. The conductor stood at the open doorway. His face was older now. The brim of his cap hid his eyes. His posture was bent in ways I hadn't seen before, as if the weight of too many decisions had finally chosen him back. "I don't know this place," I said. "You do," he replied. "You just won't name it." The dirt platform stretched empty and endless. I couldn't see where it began or ended, only that it was mine. The bell on the table was gone. In its place lay another ticket. My name again, but beneath it, a single word had been written on the blank line, a word I hadn't spoken aloud in years. It was the name of a town I had left behind long ago, a place I swore I'd never see again. The conductor tipped his head toward the open door. Time to get off. I tightened my grip on the ticket until the paper cut my fingers. The ink smudged. The field beyond the lamppost waited, wide and patient, as though it already knew which choice I'd make. The step down from the car was higher than it should have been, like the train wanted me to hesitate. My shoes sank into the dirt platform, the earth damp and uneven beneath me. Cold climbed through the soles into my bones. The train exhaled behind me, a long, tired sigh, and for a moment I thought it might pull away. but it stayed. The open doorway framed the conductor like a painting hung crooked. His cap shadowed his eyes, but I felt him watching. The lamp post hummed faintly, its bulb trembling. Beyond it, the field stretched flat, empty except for patches of grass that bent the wrong way against the wind. The horizon was close but unreachable, the sky bruised purple-gray, heavy with something that was not weather. I walked forward. The dirt gave way to grass, slick with dew that didn't shine. My shoes darkened with it. Each step was louder than it should have been, as if the field was listening. The ticket in my hand warmed until I had to let it go. It fluttered down, face up, and the earth swallowed it like it had been waiting. The grass bent toward the spot, bowing, then straightened again. I turned back once. The train looked different from here, older, hunched, its lamps dim like eyes fading. The faces in the windows were blurred by distance, but I could feel their stares, not malicious, not kind, just a weight, as if they were measuring whether I belonged more with them or here. The conductor raised one hand in a gesture that was neither farewell nor welcome. The door slid shut. The train did not move. It simply existed, silent, a line of cars pressed into the field like fossils. A sound moved across the grass. At first I thought it was the wind, but it came too steady, too patterned. Footsteps, many of them approaching from no direction I could name. The grass bent and rose, parting, and figures began to emerge. They looked like townspeople, or the idea of them. A man in overalls stained with earth, a woman in a floral dress faded to gray, children with school books under their arms. Their faces were wrong, blurred at the edges like half-developed photographs, but I knew them, the tilt of a head, the curve of a smile, the details my memory had sworn I'd buried. It was the town I had left, the one I swore I'd never return to. The figures stopped a few feet away, lined up in neat rows. None of them spoke, their silence pressed against me, thick, demanding. I whispered, "This isn't real." The man in overalls tilted his head. His voice was low, but it carried clear across the field. It was real enough to leave. My chest tightened. The words felt like they came from inside my ribs instead of his mouth. The woman in the faded dress spoke next. "You left us, but we kept the space for you. We always kept it." Her smile widened, and for a moment her face sharpened into someone I used to know. A neighbor, a teacher, a friend, but then blurred again. The children stepped forward in unison. Their books opened, pages blank. They lifted them high, showing me absence made official. The lamppost flickered once, then steadied. The hum grew louder, impatient. Behind me, the train finally moved. Not away, but sideways, sliding into the horizon like it was being erased. The field widened in its absence. I stood alone with the blurred townspeople, the sky pressing down, the grass whispering against itself. The air tasted like old choices. The man in overalls spoke again. "You can come back now. You can fill the space we saved." His voice was calm, but the calm of soil covering something. The woman in the dress added, "Or you can refuse again and wander until another train finds you. But the field won't let you leave without deciding." The children held their blank pages higher, a forest of empty. I felt the cut on my fingers sting, blood beating bright and red. It fell to the grass, the blades bent, greedy, and drank it in. The whole field leaned closer. The field leaned toward me, every blade of grass a finger pointing back to the place I'd left, every blurred face waiting for my surrender. My blood was already in the soil, a signature I hadn't meant to give, but I clenched my fist and let the sting of the cut remind me I was still mine. "I'm not coming back," I said. My voice shook but carried. "You can keep the space empty. It's not mine anymore." The man in overalls frowned, though his face rippled at the edges, as if it couldn't hold shape against refusal. "You think leaving twice makes you free?" His voice thickened, doubling, tripling, as though others inside him spoke the same line. It just makes you smaller. The woman in the faded dress stepped closer. Her smile snapped too wide, the blur of her face stretching until it resembled a dozen people layered on top of each other. We saved everything for you. The chair at the table, the name on the list. You can't walk away from that. I already did, I said, louder now. I won't fill your empty pages. I won't live in the story you've written for me. The children hissed, their blank books trembling. The paper fluttered without wind, and letters began to burn themselves onto the pages. My name, over and over, scrawled in dozens of hands, each one uglier than the last. The lamp post above me flickered violently. The bulb popped, showering sparks that sizzled out before they touched the earth. Darkness swallowed the field, except for the faint glow of the blurred faces. They surged forward, not running, not lunging, just advancing like a tide. My legs locked, the grass tightened around my ankles, curling, pulling, tasting for purchase. I tore free, stumbling back toward the spot where the train had stood. There was nothing there now, only dirt and horizon, but I ran anyway. The field stretched longer, endless, every step dragging like wading through syrup. The voices followed, back, 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 each word cracked against the air, trying to hammer me into shape. No, I shouted, throat raw. You can't have me. The earth under my feet buckled. A fissure ripped across the field, wide and sudden, a wound opening beneath the blurred townspeople. They stopped at the edge, faces flickering, books snapping shut. Their silence was louder than their voices had been. The crack glowed faintly, not with fire, but with movement, shadows twisting, shapes slipping deeper than any ground should allow. I realized the field wasn't opening to swallow me. It was cutting me off from them, a rejection of my rejection. The blurred figures faded, dissolving into ash that drifted back into the soil. The sound of their voices thinned, stretched, and snapped. I was alone. The sky above lightened a fraction, the bruised yellow shifting to gray. The horizon sharpened, and there, impossibly, the train waited again. Not where I'd left it, not anywhere sensible, just there, solid, its lamps glowing, doors open as though I'd only stepped off for air. I stumbled toward it, chest heaving, blood sticky on my hand. The platform was back too, wood this time, the boards creaking like an old house that remembered your weight. The conductor stood in the doorway, hat pulled low. He said nothing until I reached the threshold, then inclined his head just enough to be both invitation and warning. You fought it, he said. Few do. I'm not theirs, I whispered. Not theirs, he agreed. Not yet ours either. He stepped aside. I climbed back on. The doors closed with a soft sigh, and the train began to move. The passengers hadn't shifted. The teenagers played again. The man with the briefcase stared at nothing, but Mara's seat was still empty, her scarf folded neatly across the cushion, as if she had known I'd need the reminder. I sat. My legs trembled. My chest ached. The ticket burned in my pocket, hot enough to sting. I pulled it out. The line beneath valid until was still filled, but the ink had warped, the letters twisting. It no longer spelled the town's name. Now it read only one word. Next. The train rolled on, smooth as breath. The lamps hummed above, steady again, though their light felt thinner than before, stretched tight like skin over bone. I pressed the ticket flat on the table, staring at the word written across it. Next. No station name, no time, no direction, just the promise or threat of continuation. The teenagers had gone silent. Their cards lay scattered, untouched, the red and black shapes forming no pattern at all. One of them glanced at me with open fear, as if I had carried something back from the field. The man with the briefcase hunched over his knees, clutching the case like a life vest. His knuckles were white, his breathing shallow. No one spoke. The air in the car felt thinner, too. stripped of its earlier polish. Now it smelled faintly of iron and smoke, like a rail yard left to rust. I looked at Mara's empty seat again. Her scarf sat perfectly folded, but something about it had changed. It wasn't the same color anymore. What had been a deep, comforting red now looked gray, almost ash. My throat tightened. The conductor returned, moving slowly down the aisle. He didn't carry a tray this time, or a roll of tickets. His hands were empty, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his cap. When he reached me, he placed one hand on the table and leaned in slightly. "You refused," he said. "I had to," I whispered. His head tilted. "Do you know what that means? That I'm free of them?" "No." His voice was almost kind. "It means the train owns the choice now." The ticket on the table trembled, the word NX'd rippling as if ink were still wet. "Where does that take me?" I asked. "Where it wants," he said simply. "Where you've avoided longest." The floor beneath me vibrated harder, the wheels taking on a rhythm that felt urgent, impatient. The window beside me blackened until even my reflection disappeared. The hum of the lamps faltered, then steadied with a dimmer glow. Passengers shifted uneasily. The teenagers gathered their cards like shields. The man with the briefcase whispered something into his hands, prayer or apology, I couldn't tell. The conductor straightened. "We'll arrive soon." "At what?" He didn't answer. He just tipped his cap and moved on. I pressed my palm over the ticket. Heat pulsed through it, syncing with the beat of the rails. It was stronger than before, almost unbearable, but I didn't pull away. If the train was dragging me toward what I'd avoided, I wanted to feel it, wanted to know. The car grew colder. Breath fogged the air. Shadows thickened between the lamps until they bent shapes across the seats, shapes that didn't match the passengers sitting in them. The train slowed. Ahead, through the glass, a station emerged. Not earth this time, not wood. It was built of stone, black and slick, carved with lines that hurt to look at. No name marked it. No sign hung above the platform, but I knew it. Recognition punched through me like cold water. It was not a place I'd been. It was a place I'd dreamed, again and again, across years. Always the same. The black stone station, the waiting platform, the sense that stepping onto it would mean never waking up. The train shuddered to a halt. The doors opened. Air spilled in, icy sharp, threaded with whispers that might have been voices, or the sound of stone remembering its weight. The ticket on the table burned so hot it curled, the word NX searing brighter, glowing like coal. The conductor stood by the open doorway, his shadow long across the aisle. "Your stop," he said. I shook my head. "This place isn't real." "Neither is the train," he replied, "but both are waiting." The whispers outside thickened, words just beyond meaning, pressing against my skull. The passengers didn't move. Not one of them looked at me, as if my decision wasn't theirs to witness. The heat of the ticket seared my palm. Smoke rose from the paper, and still it didn't burn away. The word glowed, insisting. NX. I stood, legs trembling, every part of me screaming to sit back down, to let the doors close, to let the train move on. But my feet carried me toward the open platform anyway. The stone waited. The stone platform swallowed the sound of my step, drinking it down so completely that for a moment I thought I hadn't moved at all. Cold climbed through my shoes into my legs, deeper than weather, the kind of cold that remembers centuries. The air was thick, heavy with the weight of whispers pressed into silence. Above, the sky was neither night nor day, an endless slate gray, smeared as if someone had rubbed out the stars with their thumb. Behind me, the train waited, quiet, its lamps dim, its windows blank. The conductor stood framed in the open doorway, hat low, unreadable. He did not call me back. He did not urge me forward. He simply existed, an anchor I could no longer touch. The station stretched wide. The black stone blocks fitted together too neatly, without seam or mortar. They pulsed faintly beneath my feet, a rhythm just slower than my heartbeat, like the ground itself was alive and patient. No benches, no signs, no clocks, only a single archway ahead, carved with symbols I almost recognized. They twisted when I looked too long, slipping away from the corners of comprehension. I walked forward because standing still felt worse. The archway yawned into a corridor, narrow, the walls lined with carvings, faces, thousands of them, pressed in shallow relief. Some screaming, some calm, some watching with eyes that bulged too wide. Their mouths moved faintly, opening and closing without sound, but I felt their words sliding against the inside of my skull. At the corridor's end stood a door. Not wood, not metal, stone again, darker than the rest. No handle, no hinges, just a flat surface, carved with a shape that was horribly familiar. It was me. The outline was rough, simplified, but there was no mistaking it. My shoulders, my stance, the tilt of my head, I hated in photographs. Beneath it, words carved shallow. Return. My throat closed. The whispers swelled. The faces in the walls pressed closer, their stone lips stretching wider. I reached out, though every part of me screamed not to. My fingers brushed the carving. The stone was warm, too warm. The outline rippled under my touch like water disturbed by a pebble. The door shuddered, cracks spidered outward from the carving. The sound of stone breaking filled the corridor, low and final. The door split down the center and began to open. Beyond was not a room, not a hall, not anything built. It was a field, not the one I just left, not the town's hollow echo. This was emptier, vaster, a plain stretching under that same gray sky, and in the middle of it stood a figure, me, not a reflection, not a double, just me, standing still, hands at my sides, watching with eyes I recognized too well. I spoke, though his lips never moved. You left everything. You left us. You left yourself. How long do you think you can run? The words filled my chest as though I'd said them. The stone door behind me slammed shut. The echo rolled across the endless plain. The other me took a step closer. The other me stepped closer. The soundless plain carrying no echo, no rhythm of footsteps. His clothes matched mine exactly, down to the blood drying on the hand from the cut I'd made earlier. His face was mine, but stripped of hesitation. No fear in the eyes, no tremor in the jaw, just steadiness, cold and sharp. You thought you could outrun this, he said, and though his mouth never moved, the voice bloomed inside my skull. Every choice you left behind, every place you abandon, they don't vanish, they wait, and they grow, until you come back. I didn't come back, I whispered. My throat was tight, raw from words I hadn't said aloud. The train brought me. His smile was thin, because the train knows what you avoid longer than you do. The plain stretched endless in every direction. No escape, no train, just him, me and the horizon locked in gray. My heart hammered, but my legs rooted to the ground as he drew closer, stopping only an arm's length away. You left them, he said. The town, the faces. You left everything unfinished, and you told yourself that made you free. But here you are, with me. I wanted to turn, to run, but the plane offered nowhere to run to. I wanted to deny him, but the words stuck in my chest, lies refusing to leave. He extended a hand. Come back, return, fill the space, become whole. The word return seared in my memory, carved above the stone door. My hand trembled at my side. I knew if I touched him, I'd sink into him, be folded back into the self I'd fled. The unfinished life, the choices I'd buried, would take me whole. I'm not you anymore, I said. My voice cracked, but I forced the words out. I chose to leave. I'll keep choosing it. His eyes narrowed. The steadiness faltered, a flicker of something desperate showing beneath. You can't, he said, softer now, as if pleading. You can't live without me. You can't live without what you abandoned. If you deny me, there's nothing left. No return, no arrival, just next. The ticket in my pocket pulsed hot again. I pulled it out. The word NX glowed brighter, burning through the paper until only the light remained, hovering in my palm. The plane rippled beneath us, trembling. My double stepped back, face twisting, not in anger, but in fear. Don't, he whispered. The light flared, a sharp white that cut through the endless gray. The plane cracked, the horizon splintering like glass struck by a hammer. The other me dissolved into smoke, unraveling into the fissures, his voice breaking apart into 100 half-formed words. The ground gave way. I fell, and then rails, the clatter of wheels, the hum of lamps. I slammed into my seat in the train car, chest heaving, ticket ash crumbling in my hand. The teenagers stared, wide-eyed. The man with the briefcase had vanished, his seat empty, his absence heavy as stone. The conductor stood at the end of the aisle. His cap shadowed his eyes, but I felt the weight of his gaze. He inclined his head once. You refused, he said, so the train will keep you. The lamp steadied. The rhythm of the rails continued, endless. Outside the window, there was no landscape now, only darkness, stretching forever, unbroken. The scarf still lay across Mara's empty seat, but it was no longer ash gray. It was gone entirely, as if she had never been. I leaned back, the car rocking around me, the rails singing their two-part song. My chest still burned with the echo of that word. Next, and I understood, there would always be another stop, another station, another choice I had avoided long enough to be dragged back to. The train would never end, not until I returned. But I had fought once. I could fight again. The bell appeared on the table before me, gleaming faintly in the dim light. My reflection bent in its curve, tired, stubborn, still mine. I didn't touch it, not yet. The train carried me on, endless, into the dark. Now, onto the next story. The job was simple, on paper, which is the way certain jobs like to be. Night digitization assistant, temporary contract, graveyard shift. Arrive at 9:45 p.m., sign the ledger, collect the key card and the card of file boxes, scan insurance documents from the 1950s that smelled faintly of smoke in winter, upload, verify, return to boxes to the cage, leave by 6:10 a.m., no client contact, no phone calls. Building security would be a single guard on the mezzanine. If I needed anything, there was a radio with a cracked antenna that only talked to the mezzanine in short, courteous bursts. The email ended. Please observe after-hours protocols. They're mostly about quiet. The building had a name the way old ships have names. Whittemore and Glass, 1928, carved over the door. Limestone softened by a century of weather and hands. It had not tried to be tall, but it had tried to be right. Brass, marble, blunted edges of stairs worn by shoes that knew how to be shoes. I stepped in, and the echo did that thing echoes do in good lobbies, announce you to the building in a voice kinder than your own. The guard on the mezzanine leaned over the rail like an usher. He had the face of a person who had learned to nap with his eyes open. A blue blazer hung from a hook behind him, dignified even off his shoulders. Night digitization, I said, raising one hand as if hailing a cab. First shift. Then you're early, he replied, checking a clipboard with a pencil that had been sharpened into stubbornness. That's the best way to arrive anywhere. Name? I gave it and watched him find it like a word in a prayer book. He nodded, satisfied, and pointed at a book the size of a pizza box sitting on the marble table below his perch. The cover was leather cracked into maps. A pen lay diagonally across it. Not modern, not antique, just permanent. Sign where it wants you, he said, which I disliked for reasons I couldn't name. Below that, practicalities. Keycards in the drawer. Third floor is archives. Backroom lights are on a timer. Scanner's temperamental. If it pretends to jam on the second pull, feed the page again upside down. Makes it think it won. I signed. The paper took the ink with a thirsty satisfaction, the way plants take rain. My name looked sensible there, as if it had been waiting for this particular calligraphy its whole life. The guard watched my hand, and then glanced at a clock that had been keeping time since laws wore hats. After-hours protocols are on the placard by the elevator, he said. They're simple. Follow them like you mean it. The placard was brass, etched shallowly, polished by generations of reading. After-hours protocols, it said, as if I'd wandered into a club for polite ghosts. 1. Do not use the west stairwell between midnight and 3 a.m. It tends to repeat itself. 2. If the elevator stops on 4 when you pressed 3, step out, step back in, and press 3 again. Do not look down the hall. 3. Radios are for check-ins at the top of the hour. If you hear your name at any other time, it is the mezzanine, and we are testing you. Do not answer until 0. 4. Reflections after 2 a.m. are none of our business. 5. At 5:40 a.m., return the boxes to the cage, sign out exactly as you signed in, and leave by the north doors. The south doors are for day people. I read it twice, felt the smile forming on my face, a small amused thing at someone's idea of atmosphere. The guard didn't return it. They're there because we learned them, he said, and in his voice a long line of knights turned their heads to listen. The elevator had a crank-era dignity and a retrofit of buttons that had decided to be honest. I pressed 3. It considered. It rose. On the way up, the world stepped away in increments, and I saw myself in the faint metal, tired, a little hopeful, the color of my coat faded by old sun. I looked away to be polite to the placard. The third-floor corridor smelled like paper that had learned how to keep its breath. Lights hummed magnesium white. The archive door had a grill inset like a polite prison. Inside, steel shelves marched neat as an army, labels written in block letters with numbers that told a story of their own. The scanner sat on a table near the only window tall enough to feel like a posture, its surface a square of glass that remembered every set of hands that had wiped it. A rolling chair leaned against the wall, judging nothing. The radio crackled on the cart. Mezzanine, the guard's voice said. Check at the hour. Welcome to Whitmore and Glass. Copy, I said, because language bends to the room it's in. He didn't answer. The clock on the wall, age indeterminate, second hand limping on purpose, said 9:52. I had time to breathe. I did. The first box was light with letters from 1951. Fire claims, winter claims, a water damage report, written in a hand that would have made a doctor envious. I fed them to the scanner and learned its moods. Don't rush. Don't press too hard on the glass. Flatten gently with your palm like calming a nervous horse. Pages that had been folded for decades remembered how to be flat with a sigh. I named the files sensibly so that future me could find them. Date, claim, initials that had faded into time. At 10 exactly, I pressed the radio's button. Third floor, I said, working. All well. Mezzanine, the guard replied. Heard. The building went about its gentle night chores. Air cycled. Ducks thought quietly. Far below, something heavy moved the way furniture moves when it tries to sit down without bothering anyone. I fell into a rhythm that belonged more to the room than to me. Feed, align, scan, check, name, return. Every 10th page I stood and left my body in the chair for a breath, the way you do when the task is good, but your bones have had a day. After a while, no timekeeping needed, just body footsteps entered the corridor and walked the floor like someone testing an instrument. I didn't hear the elevator. The steps began at the far angle and came toward the archive door with a steadiness that made me set my palm on the scanner glass to keep from moving. They stopped beside the window. Through the grill, I saw a shoulder in a gray suit, the color of old money, no face. The steps did not belong to the building the way the guards did. They belonged to the hour itself. They paused as if reading. The radio stayed quiet. I stayed quiet. The steps went on toward the west stairwell, and then, without sound to justify it, I knew they had turned around and climbed down the same landing twice. Protocol 1 was, apparently, not a joke. I worked. Work is a bridge you build between yourself and a place. At 11 third floor. Working. Mezzanine. Heard. At 11:37, the scanner took offense at a perforated form and pretended to jam. I humored it, fed the page upside down, and it decided to be helpful again, gratified by my willingness to let it win. At 11:50, I stood to stretch and saw my reflection in the window glass superimposed overnight. My face looked patient. The room behind me looked like a set that knew its lines. The second hand kept its limp. The radio stayed uninterested. Midnight had a weight in this building. You could feel it settle into the marble like a coin dropping into a jar. At 12 I pressed the radio and said my piece. The mezzanine's answer had a blink of delay, as if he had been talking to someone just then and had needed to excuse himself. Heard, he said. Mind the west stairs. I'm not using the stairs, I said, because I had learned to narrate my own safety. Elevator's loyal. Good, he said, and the line clicked back into its house. At 12:20, I needed the restroom, which lived 2 doors down, past the framed photographs of men in hats who had been called vice president when that job meant keeping keys and not much else. I took the radio because it felt like the sort of talisman you don't leave behind. The hallway echoed the way hallways echo when they have high ceilings and a memory for heels. In the mirror over the sink, the fluorescent light softened enough to make my face forgive me. I washed my hands long enough to feel like I had reset a clock. When I stepped back into the corridor, the elevator doors were open, framed by their own careful brass. I hadn't pressed the button. The car waited, lit, that mild square of space with a scuffed threshold that says, people. I stood where I was and let it wait. The doors did not mind. They hung open like a mouth prepared to tell a story, only if asked. I took one step forward, and the radio crackled once, not with voice but with that dry sound radios make when they are choosing their next word. 3rd floor, I said into it, a little too quickly. Bathroom break. Returning. Mezzanine, the guard said. Take your time. Don't rush the elevator. I I began, and stopped. The elevator's light dimmed, and then brightened, as if it had blinked. I walked past it without stepping in, and felt something in the car's air consider me. Behind me, the doors closed without complaint. At 1, the check-in. At 1:14, the first real oddness. I pressed 3 on the elevator to return from a trip to the copy room, and the car took me to 4. The doors opened onto a hall with carpet, the color of a sleeping bruise, and lights that had decided to be soft. The placard's memory reached up and tapped my shoulder. Step out, step back in, press 3 again. Do not look down the hall. I followed the rule like I meant it. The carpet tried to be a horizon in my peripheral vision. The air smelled like flowers had been asked to behave. I did not look. Back in, button, 3. The car corrected itself like a well-trained animal and took me where I belonged. At 1:30, a page with a single line in pencil made me sit longer than I needed to. Keep receipt if it burns twice. It was nothing, just a secretary's quick note from a day someone's office stank of singed dust. But the words accumulated weight in my mind, the way certain phrases do in certain rooms. Burns twice. I put the page to the glass and gave it the flattery of a good scan, as if respect could move backward in time. At 1:58, I realized I had been humming. I don't hum. The tune sloped up and down like a stair that turned on itself. I stopped. The radio woke itself. Mezzanine, the guard said before I could press the button. 2 minutes. I'm here, I said, and suddenly needed that to be true in more than one way. At 2:00, the radio clicked and the check-in was simple. At 2:06, the window glass decided to remember it was a mirror, and for a moment I saw the room behind me, not as it was, but as it wanted to be in a different year. The chair newer, the table darker, a fan in the corner pretending to make a difference. In that reflection, the door to the archive was closed. I felt my own hand reach up and rub my jaw, and in the glass the reflected hand did not. It took a breath and put itself down. I looked away because Protocol 4 was clear, and because I wanted the rule more than I wanted information. At 2:21, footsteps again, the same steady measure, the same kindness to the floor. They went past toward the west stairs. I counted them against the clock to test something. They reached the landing at 2:23, and then reached it again at 2:24. The rhythm was exact, the repetition patient, like someone reciting a poem to remember a dead person's middle name. I pressed my lips together and held very still until the poem ended. At 2:40, I opened a file that didn't belong in the box. Wrong year, wrong department. A small folder labeled Night Ledger, borrowed. Inside, a thin notebook bound in red cloth. Not the big book downstairs, a cousin, a pocket version. The pages were nearly empty. In neat, tired handwriting, a list. If the elevator breathes, you breathe slower. If the west stair repeats, count steps and do not correct. If the radio says your name after the hour, tell it about weather with no nouns. Do not let your reflection start the conversation. At 3:15, go get coffee. Bring a second cup. Put it on the table by the door. Return the cup to the sink at 4 on the dot. Dry it. Leave no proof of wet. There was a blot beneath the last line, a small drowned star. I looked at the scanner, at the clock, at the door. At 3:10, I found a clean ceramic mug in the cabinets under the sink, chalk white with a hairline crack that made it more honest. I poured from the ancient carafe in the copy room. The smell rose and did what coffee does, made courage an option. At 3:15, because someone else had done this before me and left instructions, I poured a second cup and set it on the table by the door to the archive, where the grill looked like it could keep something in and let someone see out. The steam made a shape, and then another, and then decided to be air. Nobody came. The coffee sat. My own cup cooled and tasted like a story whose ending you already knew. At 3:59, with a small, embarrassed feeling I couldn't shake, I took the untouched cup to the sink and washed it. The crack in the glaze darkened and then dried pale again. I put it back where I'd found it. The instructions had not been for me, I told myself. They had been for the hour. At 4, the radio breathed. Not the guard, not a voice, the sound of a room thinking. I pressed the button and said calmly, the weather with no nouns. It will be. It has been. It is not. It pretends to. It would like to. It might if we let it. The sound stopped politely, as if satisfied with my grammar. At 4:20, the scanner refused a page that looked normal. It slid halfway, hesitated, slid back. I checked the rollers. Fine. I flipped the page. Same refusal. Third try, it took the paper and made an image that was all dark, as if I'd laid my palm to the glass. Fourth try, the text appeared in perfect gray, but the date in the corner was wrong by a year, 1950, instead of 1951. I saved it with the name it insisted on, and told myself that nothing prefers to be exact all night long. At 5, wariness came down soft across my shoulders, like a coat offered by a kind stranger. The building felt warm by then, the way old spaces do, after you've been gentle with them. The mezzanine answered crisply at the hour, sounding for the first time like he'd had coffee and let it be coffee. Coming home time, he said. Mind the north doors. Copy, I said, as if the word could hold me upright for the last hour. Protocol 5 circled in my head. neat and final. Boxes to the cage. Sign out exactly as I signed in. North doors. The scanner was suddenly eager to please. Pages flew, names settled, digital files lined up in their folder like well-behaved schoolchildren. At 5:32, the elevator came when I asked and took me to 3 instead of 4. At 5:37, I rolled the cart to the cage at the end of the corridor and slid the boxes into their slots, numbers returning to numbers like fish to water. I closed the padlock and felt it take my decision. At 5:40, exactly, I stood at the ledger in the archive to make the last notes I kept for myself, and noticed that the red notebook I'd returned to the borrowed folder was missing. The folder sat where I'd left it. The notebook was not inside. I did not look for it, not because I am noble, but because I had learned the weight of looking after certain hours. At 5:45, I pressed 1, and the elevator took me down. The brass rail under my hand, warmer than metal, has a right to be. The lobby was the kind that makes you quiet because the air has earned it. On the marble table, the big ledger waited with its pen lying diagonal, exactly where it wanted me. I signed out in the line that had been waiting to be complete, a simple echo of my own hand from hours earlier. The ink looked satisfied. The guard watched me with the approval reserved for people who've taken instruction well. First night's the whole degree, he said, and picked up his pencil. The rest is practicum. I read the placard, I said. They're not jokes. No, he said, they're manners. He looked past me to the south doors, glass darker than it should be, as if the night had left part of itself there. North, he reminded, day folks can have the south. I turned to go and remembered the coffee. I didn't say anything. He didn't either. The morning outside had the brittle light of a new habit. I stepped into it and felt taller, not because I'd done anything brave, but because I had been precise in a building that demanded precision. On the sidewalk, buses yawned, and people began practicing their faces for the day. I breathed in the air that hadn't been filtered in 100 years, and thought absurdly of the instruction about the cup. I would come back the next night and bring 2 again. It wasn't superstition. It was a way to be courteous to an hour. At home, I slept in a way that didn't feel like quitting. When I woke, the city had already put on its noise. My phone had 3 messages I didn't listen to. I made tea because coffee belonged to the building in my mind. By early evening, I found myself looking forward to the elevator's small consideration, the scanner's moods, the mezzanine's brief acknowledgments that felt like finding a neighbor in a big place. The job was simple. The rules were simpler. I wanted the simplicity like you want a clean page. That second night, the ledger wanted me 2 lines down from where I'd signed before. I didn't argue. The guard nodded as if that had been a test I'd passed. Storm later, he said, glancing at the clock. If the radio talks during the storm, let it finish. Weather likes to hear itself. I won't answer, I said, and the words felt like buckling a belt. Answer at the hour, he said. Tell me something boring. Like what? Like the number of boxes, he said, and smiled. It makes the building jealous. The elevator blinked at me in a friendly way. On 3, the corridor smelled of warm dust. I set my things down, greeted the room in my head because sometimes that helps, and began to work. At 10, I told the radio there were 12 boxes on the cart. The mezzanine said, heard, and the shelf across from me creaked as if it would have preferred a different number. At 11, I said there were 11. At midnight, 10. I was lying to the building courteously, giving it something to want without giving it anything it could take. At 12:40, the west stair repeated itself twice so neatly that it felt like a drum beat. At 1:05, my reflection asked me a question with its eyes, and I answered by closing mine. At 1:30, the red notebook was back in the folder, with a new line in the neat, tired hand. If you bring 2 cups at 3:15, Leave one near the elevator. He prefers the hall. At 3:15, I left the second cup on the small table by the elevator bank, not in the car, because the rule didn't say in. Steam rose, and the brass trim reflected it like weather in miniature. I went back to work. At 3:59, I collected the cup, its surface marked with the faintest ring where a lip had been, though no lip had been there. I washed it without looking for proof. I dried it thoroughly. I put it back on the shelf where cups rest and pretend to be ordinary. At 4:40, the building gently, a big cat turning over in sleep. The radio spoke my name in a voice that sounded like the mezzanine and a room in rain braided. I told it the number of boxes. It went quiet, satisfied with arithmetic. At 5:40, I closed up exactly as before. At the ledger downstairs, my hand hesitated, just once, because the line that wanted me was not the next one, but the one below it, and I realized the book was keeping time with me, not the other way around. I signed where it wanted. The guard's pencil paused over his crossword. "You'll do," he said. 3 nights is knowing, 5 is belonging. If you leave before 5, bring a receipt, even if it burns twice. I nodded as if that were a thing people said. Outside, morning had set the table again, and I went home to sleep, counting my breaths the way a kind building likes, steady and exact, keeping the small rules that let bigger things leave you alone. The third night greeted me like an old habit. The bus ride blurred by in pieces of streetlight, and I stepped onto the Whittemore and glass sidewalk before the hour had fully darkened. The limestone looked softer than it had the first night, as if the building had decided to trust me with more of its weight. The guard on the mezzanine barely glanced up. He seemed to know my footsteps now. His blazer hung on the hook, the same dignified tilt, as if it had always belonged to the wall. "Ledger?" he said, pencil in hand, voice steadier than the night outside. The book waited open on the marble table. The line below my last entry was already thirsty. Paper grain angled toward my pen. I signed where it wanted. The ink darkened in an instant, obedient. The guard's pencil scratched across his crossword, a sound of mild approval. "Storm cleared," he said. "The building will try something quieter tonight. That's when people make mistakes." "Quieter is harder," I admitted. "Always," he said, not unkindly. "Noise tells on itself. Quiet waits for you to tell on yourself." I pocketed the keycard and pressed the elevator's brass button. The car came promptly. No hesitation, no tricks. The placard by the door had begun to shine in my memory without needing to look. West stairs between midnight and 3. 4th floor. Radios at the hour. Reflections not your business. North doors only. Rules as clear as prayers, as sharp as warnings. I repeated them under my breath as the elevator lifted me. On 3, the corridor breathed paper and warm dust. The archive door recognized me with a sigh in its hinges. I set the boxes on the table and greeted the scanner like an old colleague. My reflection in its glass was faint, almost polite, as if it had been taught manners by the guard himself. The radio crackled once, then stilled, saving its first word for the hour. I worked. Work was becoming easier, my hands knowing the scanner's moods, my body remembering when to stand, when to stretch. Letters from the late 1940s, typed on onion skin paper that still held the crisp scent of carbon. Claims for floods, for broken windows, for the kind of accidents that sound small in retelling but are disasters in the moment. Each page flattened under my palm, scanned into permanence, set back into the box with the respect you give bones. At 10, I pressed the button. 3rd floor. Working. All well. Mezzanine. Heard. The guard's voice was steady. His words clipped, as though the hour had no room for ornament. The building hummed. I could almost feel the ducks exhaling behind the walls. Somewhere below, a door shifted in its frame, a soft click like punctuation. I fed pages, named files, lined them in their folders. My thoughts thinned until only the work and the clock remained. Tick, scan, save. Tick, scan, save. The rhythm became its own answer. At 10:37, the west stair creaked, once, though no one should have been using it. I paused, my fingers on the paper, listening. The sound came again, fainter, like an echo stretched too far. Protocol 1 echoed in my mind. Do not use between midnight and 3. It tends to repeat itself. It was early yet, but maybe the stairs were rehearsing. I turned back to the scanner, keeping my eyes fixed on the glass. At 11, the radio clicked. Third floor, I said. 2 boxes down. Mezzanine. Heard. Count them again. I counted aloud into the radio. 10 remaining. Good, he said. The building wanted a different number. The line went quiet. My skin prickled. I looked at the boxes, counted them silently. 10. They hadn't moved, but for one instant, I thought I could see their shadows stacked a little differently, taller, as if a hand had touched them when I wasn't watching. I wrote the number in my notebook, a small defense against doubt. At 11:20, footsteps, not the measured kind I'd heard before, but light, quick, like someone pacing to keep awake. They stopped outside the door. The grill framed nothing but shadow, but I felt watched. A whisper followed, not words, but the shape of breath forming in tension. My throat tightened. The rules repeated in my mind. Radios at the hour, not before. I didn't move. The whisper lengthened, testing the silence, and then withdrew, footsteps fading toward the stairwell. I exhaled only when the building exhaled with me. At 11:55, I stood stretching. The window glass was black with night. My reflection blurred across it. My face pale, my hair pulled back. I avoided my eyes, remembering Protocol 4. But in the glass, my reflection's hand lifted when mine did not. It tapped the sill 3 times like a code. I froze. My real hand remained still at my side. The reflection smiled faintly, then vanished into the black. I stepped back, breath shaking, and turned to the radio, waiting for the hour. At 12, third floor, working, boxes accounted, mezzanine, heard, the guard said, though his voice carried a rasp as if he'd been running. Don't look at the glass tonight. I didn't, I said. That's why you're still answering. His tone made no room for misunderstanding. The storm of the night before had gone, but the quiet was sharper, more insistent. I scanned pages, forcing my eyes to the text, my ears to the radio's silence. Every tick of the clock felt like a test. At 12:40, the elevator chimed softly in the hall. Though I hadn't pressed the button, the doors opened with a sigh. I stayed at my table, pulse quick. The air shifted, like the car had exhaled a breath it had held too long. Then the doors closed, slow and disappointed. I let the silence rebuild itself. At one seft of the radio, third floor, I said, 7 boxes remaining. Mezzanine, heard. Weather? Clear, I said. Not for long, he answered, and the radio clicked out. At 1:14, the scanner stopped. Its screen flickered, black, then pale green. Lines of text scrolled where the claim form should have been. The words were mine, my own notes, my handwriting digitized, though I had not written them. They read, keep receipt if it burns twice, return coin when the day wants it, ask it back. The screen went black. My hands trembled as I pulled the page, scanned again, and this time it behaved. I saved the file quickly, as though speed could undo what I had seen. At 1:30, the red notebook appeared again in the wrong folder. Its page had gained another line. If you hear your name before the hour, say the number of breaths you've taken. Nothing else. I copied the instruction into my notebook and returned the red one to its place, though I knew it would not stay. At 1:55, the radio hissed. My name, spoken slowly, like someone tasting it for the first time. My chest tightened. I counted my breaths, steady, deliberate. 132, I said. The hiss faded. The radio was silent until the hour, when the guard's voice returned, calm and ordinary. "Third floor? Working. 6 boxes left. Heard," he said. His tone carried no hint that anything had happened. At 2:10, the west stair began again, this time louder, heavier, like boots. They reached the landing, paused, then repeated, over and over, as if the stairwell itself had grown bored and decided to loop a memory. I pressed my hands to my knees, holding still. The sound grew louder, closer, until I felt the vibration in the floor. Then it stopped. The silence afterward was worse than the sound. I counted the boxes again, just to hear my own voice. At 2:30, the reflection returned, not in the window, but in the scanner glass. My face upside down, staring at me with eyes that didn't blink. I closed the lid gently, covering it. The scanner hummed like a throat clearing, then quieted. I pressed the radio at the hour and forced my voice to be steady. "Third floor, 4 boxes left." "Heard," the guard said. His voice sounded tired, but alive. At 3 pain, my body ached with weariness. I made coffee in the copy room, poured 2 cups, set one on the table by the elevator, as the red notebook had instructed. Steam curled. I sipped mine and felt the warmth reach my bones. At 3:15, the cup by the elevator had cooled, the surface rippling faintly, as though someone had just set it down. I carried it back, washed it, dried it. No proof remained, but the crack in the glaze was deeper now, almost a second mouth. I put it back and returned to my chair, throat dry. At 3:30, the scanner took a page and gave me an image of a corridor. Not mine, not this building's. Long, dim, lined with doors. At the end, a shadow turned. I deleted it, scanned again. The claim form appeared, ordinary. I saved it quickly and didn't look at the file again. At 4, the radio. "Third floor, 2 boxes left. Heard. Don't answer any knocks," the guard said. "That's not a protocol, that's just advice." At 4:20, 3 soft knocks came at the archive door. Not insistent, courteous. My name whispered. Low. I held my breath. The knocks came again, slower. I pressed the coin in my pocket, though I hadn't meant to bring it. It warmed under my fingers. The silence returned. I exhaled only when the clock ticked louder, reclaiming the room. At 5, the last pages scanned, the files saved. I stacked the boxes neatly, rolled the cart to the cage, and locked it. The padlock clicked shut with satisfaction. At 5:40, I stood before the ledger again. My hand hesitated. The line it wanted was 2 spaces down. I signed there. The ink bloomed like a bruise. The guard watched me from above, pencil idle. 3 nights is knowing, he said. 5 is belonging. You're at knowing now. The next 2 will decide which way it goes. I nodded, though my throat felt thick, and after 5, the building remembers you, he said. It doesn't forget. The doors opened. The morning light poured in, pale and forgiving. I stepped outside, the rules circling in my head, and thought of the notebook's line, "Ask it back." I wondered if I had the courage. The 4th night began, before I even reached the doors. I knew it because the air outside Whittemore and Glass felt different, as though the building had unbuttoned part of itself to see if I'd notice. The limestone glowed faintly under streetlight, less a surface than a face waiting for recognition. The guard on the mezzanine raised his eyes when I stepped inside. His pencil hovered over the crossword, but hadn't committed to a word. "Ledger," he said, though his tone carried weight tonight, heavier than the first 3 nights. The book waited for me on the marble table, its cover open, pen resting diagonal like a compass needle that already knew my direction. I placed my name 2 lines down from where I thought I should, and the page accepted it without protest. The ink shimmered faintly in the lobby light, as if the paper were rehearsing its own echo. The guard studied me for longer than usual. 4 nights, he said. That's a threshold. If you cross it polite, you might find belonging. If you cross it careless, you'll find something else. "What's on the other side?" I asked, though my voice cracked. He shook his head. not refusing to answer, but letting me know the question wasn't mine to ask yet. North doors don't forget, he said. And if the radio tells you something about yourself you didn't know, don't argue, just nod. I didn't like that rule. He didn't care if I liked it. The elevator came quickly, its doors opening like an old friend deciding to be kind. On the ride up, I watched my reflection faint in the metal walls, not sharp enough to catch my eyes, but enough to remind me I had them. I pressed 3. The car rose without hesitation. The corridor smelled sharper tonight, less paper, more ozone, like the aftermath of a photocopier running too hot. The archive door greeted me with its usual reluctant sigh. Inside, the boxes stood ready, stacked in the neatness of waiting. The scanner hummed, glass cool under my palm. The radio clicked once, acknowledging me without words, then fell silent until the hour. I began with insurance claims from 1947, thin sheets typed by hands long gone. The words felt brittle in my fingers, brittle in the way memories sometimes are, capable of snapping if handled wrong. I fed them to the scanner, flattened the folds gently, saved each digital echo into its folder. At 10i, I pressed the radio. 3rd floor, working, 10 boxes remaining. The guard's voice came steady. Mezzanine, heard. You sound tired. Drink water. I obeyed, pouring a glass from the jug in the corner. The water tasted faintly metallic, as if the pipes remembered storms. At 10:30, I glanced at the window. It was dark, reflecting me dimly. My reflection seemed normal at first, but when I lifted my hand to rub my neck, it didn't follow. Instead, it wrote something in condensation across the glass, though I hadn't breathed near it. One word, ask. My stomach nodded. Protocol 4 whispered, reflections after 2 a.m. are none of our business. But it wasn't 2 yet. Was this the building bending the rules, or was I? I turned away and buried myself in work. At 11, the radio clicked. 3rd floor, 9 boxes left, I said. Mezzanine, heard. Boxes are listening. His words unsettled me. I counted them aloud anyway. 1, 2, 3. The sound of my own voice reassured me, though the shadows near the stack shifted faintly, as if the boxes adjusted themselves when unobserved. At 11:15, the west stair repeated itself, faint but insistent, step after step, then again, like a skipping record. I stayed at my table, hands steady on the scanner. The sound ceased abruptly, replaced by a whisper that pressed through the grill in the door. My name, drawn out like a rope being pulled. I remembered the red notebook's instruction. If you hear your name before the hour, count your breaths. 150, I whispered. The sound faded, leaving only the hum of the lights. At 11:30, the scanner refused a page. Instead of an image, the screen filled with text I hadn't written. The handwriting looked like mine, but older, as if aged by years I hadn't lived yet. The words read, "Don't answer with silence. Silence is still an answer. Ask it back." The letters pulsed faintly on the screen, then vanished. I scanned again. The page appeared normal. I saved it quickly, but my fingers trembled. At 11:55, I prepared for the check-in, nervous. The radio hissed. My name again, softer this time, coaxing. I pressed the button and said firmly, 200 breaths. The hiss stopped. At the hour, the guard's voice arrived, steady but weary. 3rd floor, 8 boxes left. Heard, he said, then paused. Don't let it charm you. Charm is a hunger with good posture. Midnight settled differently tonight. The silence had edges. I scanned page after page, forcing rhythm into my bones. The tick of the clock became a lifeline. At 12:20, the elevator chimed in the hall. The doors opened. I didn't press the button. The car waited, empty, its light too bright for the corridor. I ignored it, pressing the radio instead. 3rd floor, elevator opened. Mezzanine, heard, let it close itself. It did, reluctantly, as if disappointed in me. At 12:40, the window reflection returned. This time it didn't mimic me at all. It simply stared, its eyes darker than mine, its mouth set in a question I couldn't hear. I turned my chair so the window was behind me. The reflection could have all the staring it wanted. At 1, the radio. 3rd floor. 6 boxes remaining. Heard, the guard said. His voice wavered, as if the building had leaned too close to his perch. At 1:15, the scanner displayed not text but a photograph, black and white, grainy, of the very room I sat in, but emptier, with wooden tables instead of steel. In the center of the image, a woman sat at a desk. Her face was pale, hair tied back, eyes fixed on something outside the frame. Her hands rested on a red notebook. I blinked. The image vanished. The page scanned normally. I saved it, my pulse hammering. At 1:30, I checked the box labeled Night Ledger Borrowed. The red notebook was inside. I opened it carefully. A new line had appeared. At 1:45, open the ledger downstairs. It will already be open for you. Sign nothing, only look. My throat tightened. I shouldn't. Protocol said nothing about leaving my floor. Yet the note pulsed in my mind like a heartbeat. At 1:40, I hesitated at the archive door, radio in hand. The corridor stretched long, lights buzzing. I pressed the button, 3rd floor, leaving to check something. Silence. Then the guard's voice. You'll find it open. Don't linger. My legs carried me to the elevator. The ride down was long, as though the building had stretched itself. The lobby was dim, shadows deeper than before. The big ledger lay open on the marble table, pages spread wide. I approached slowly. Names filled the lines, neat and endless, in handwriting that shifted from decade to decade. Some names I recognized faintly, old city officials, businessmen whose portraits I'd seen in dusty hallways. And then I saw mine, written not once but twice. The first entry was from the first night. The second was from tonight. Below it, a 3rd space waited, my name already half formed in faint gray, as though the book had started writing it for me. I stepped back quickly, breath sharp. The ink shimmered faintly in the dim light. I whispered without meaning to, "What do you keep when we don't answer?" The ledger pages rustled as if caught in wind, though the air was still. I turned and hurried back to the elevator, heart pounding. At 1:55, I returned to the archive, chest tight. The radio hissed my name again. I whispered, 280 breaths, and it stopped. At the hour, the guard's voice came calm. 3rd floor? 5 boxes left. Heard. You looked. Good. Looking is safer than signing. At 2:15, the west stair boomed louder, heavier, until the sound vibrated the walls. It repeated the landing 3 times before fading. The silence after was a vacuum. At 2:30, my reflection in the scanner glass smiled faintly, though my lips were pressed tight. It lifted its hand and pointed downward, toward the lobby. I shut the lid quickly, breath shallow. At 2:40, the scanner spit out another image, the ledger, open, with my name written a 3rd time. I hadn't touched it. The ink was fresh. My stomach dropped. I saved the file under the name the machine insisted on, my name 11948. At 3 wall, 3rd floor, 3 boxes left. Heard, the guard said, his voice sharp. Finished tonight. Tomorrow belongs to it. At 3:15, I poured 2 cups of coffee, leaving one by the elevator as before. When I returned at 3:59, the cup was empty, dry, as if nothing had ever filled it. I washed it, dried it, put it back. At 4, the radio hissed once, then spoke. My name, followed by words I hadn't expected. You belong here now. My chest clenched. Protocol said, do not argue. So I nodded, though the guard couldn't see. At 4:10, the scanner gave me one last trick, a file image of my own hand holding the brass coin from the coastal town, though I had left it at home. I stared, shaken, then saved it under the date the system assigned, 5:40. At 5, Sipwalk, I finished the last pages, locked the boxes in the cage. My hands shook as I pressed the elevator button. The ride down was smooth, the car patient. The ledger waited again on the marble table. My name now appeared 3 times, each darker than the last. The pen lay diagonally, daring me. I didn't touch it. The guard's eyes followed me from the mezzanine, pencil still. 4 nights, he said softly. You've crossed. Tomorrow decides if you keep your house, or if the building keeps it for you. I nodded, throat too tight to speak. I left by the north doors into the brittle light of morning. The city had begun to stir, buses yawning, people practicing faces for the day. But my thoughts remained behind, in the lobby, with the ledger that wrote my name before I did. The 5th night met me at the curb like a verdict. The limestone looked almost wet under the streetlights, as if the building had washed its face before seeing me. My feet knew the rhythm up the steps. Inside, the lobby held its breath politely. The guard on the mezzanine didn't speak for a moment, pencil hovering, blazer a dark shoulder against the rail. Then ledger. He didn't need to say more. The book lay open on the marble table, with the pen resting at a precise diagonal that felt like a hand placed on a forearm. Easy now. I looked without letting my eyes rest anywhere too long. My name occupied 3 lines already, the 3rd one darker than ink has any business being. Below it, the page had swollen very slightly, as though something beneath the paper were inhaling. A 4th space waited. The first letter of my name ghosted there like frost on glass. I didn't touch the pen. North doors when you go, the guard said in his usual tone, and then almost gently, if it calls you by a name you like better than your own, pretend you didn't hear. It felt like a benediction disguised as bureaucracy. I pressed the elevator button. The car came without coyness. On the ride up, my reflection in the brushed metal watched me not watch it, and we were both satisfied with the manners of the arrangement. The corridor on 3 smelled like warm paper and the inside of a coat you trust. The archive door sighed me in. Boxes, 6 neat spines of work. The scanner quiet, glass cool as a truth. The clock on the wall held its second hand like a baton, insisting each beat be counted and none be dramatized. The radio clicked once, a courteous throat clear for the hour to come, and slept again. I began. Sometimes work is the rope you throw yourself. Forms from 46-47, a hailstorm's tally, a recovered safe, a basement flood that read like a confession. Flatten, feed, smooth, scan, name, save. 10 minutes in, my body remembered the order and took it from my worried mind. At 10, I pressed the radio. 3rd floor, working. 6 boxes remaining. Mezzanine, came steady, heard. Drink water, keep your count. I obeyed. The pipes tasted like they had learned civility from storms. At 10:22, the west stair gave a single small creak, as if clearing its throat to make sure I was still listening. I didn't move. At 10:37, the elevator chimed and opened in the hall. The car's light fell a little too far into the corridor. I didn't look. It waited, then closed, disappointed in a way I could feel in my teeth. At 11 check-in, 4 boxes left. Heard, the mezzanine said, and then quieter. If the glass asks, don't answer. If it writes, read with your eyes closed. I didn't ask him how. Moments later, the window found frost, where there should have been only black. Letters drew themselves faintly in the dim. Keep count. The words unwrote themselves at once, shy to be caught behaving. I turned my chair so the window became a wall, and the wall became everything that mattered. Paper, light. My own breath counted to 10, and then again. At 11:18, the scanner flashed an image not from any claim. The ledger downstairs, open, my name written a 4th time, and beneath it a single line that did not belong to signatures at all. House kept. I blinked it away, scanned again, received the ordinary gray rectangular solace of typewritten damage. I saved the file under its assigned name and didn't try to rename it. At 11:43, footsteps, not the measured kind, but a single pair learning how to be careful. They stopped outside the grill. A voice like paper held to the mouth said my name exactly the way my grandmother would when she found me awake at a forbidden hour. My throat warmed with the memory. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth and counted breaths. When I reached 100, the voice became the hall again, and the hall became quiet. At 12 third floor, I said. 3 boxes left. Heard, the mezzanine replied. A pause. It'll make you an offer after 2. Offers are not questions. Keep your rule. I wanted to ask what my rule was, and then remembered I'd been practicing it all week. Answer only at the hour, count your own house, ask it back. I worked. The building was listening. I could feel it in the way the duck's hum shifted. A not quite melody changing its key to lean closer. At 12:27, the west stair began its repetition, landing and landing, like a needle stuck in one groove of a record that refuses to be a song. It went on long enough to force me into choosing. I chose to stand, place both feet flat, and say softly into the room that did not require my voice, "We are not walking." The stair, as if embarrassed, stopped. At 12:40, the scanner produced a photograph of the lobby in the 1930s, marble brighter, palms and brass planters. A man with a newspaper under his arm paused halfway to the south doors. On the table, the ledger stood thinner, younger, its paper less thirsty. In the mezzanine, a guard leaned just as mine leans, his blazer a century's cousin. I let the image pass through me, the way you let a story do its work. Scan, save. A name for the file arrived uninvited. When you leave, turn left. I kept the assigned numeric. The building could keep its prose. At 1 juror, 3rd floor, 2 boxes. Heard, the mezzanine said, a breath later adding, reflections are none of our business. The glass of the scanner hummed in agreement, as if flattered to be excluded. At 1:11, the red notebook waited in the wrong folder again. I opened it because pretending I wouldn't would have been another kind of invitation. A single line, neat and tired. At 1:30, go to the lobby. Look at the ledger. Ask it back. Sign nothing that speaks first. My hand itched. The rule I'd learned in the coastal town. Ask it back. Rose like a life jacket in water. I pressed the radio. 3rd floor. Going to lobby at 1:30. Silence stretched. Then the guard. Go. Do not touch the pen unless the book asks you a question, and waits. If it tells you anything, nod and come back. The elevator carried me a little slower, as if savoring me. The lobby had been polished by night. The ledger lay open like a chest cavity, learning how to breathe again, lines and lines of names. The air above the paper had a weight. When I stepped within arm's length, the ink in my 3 signatures deepened, as though made wet again by attention. A 4th space waited, ghost letter faint. I felt it lean. The rules I'd written on the inside of my throat put my voice in order. What do you owe us? The pages did not riffle. The building did not groan. The air grew dense with the feeling of someone halfway through deciding. A faint smell, like old receipts, warmed beside the book. The pen rolled a fraction, then stilled, pointed toward the line beneath my name. My mouth began to shape the first letter, and my own rule knocked my teeth together. Ask it back. What do you keep when we do not answer? The pen rolled back as if someone had put a finger on it. The half letter on the page unghosted itself, and then thinned again, indecisive. A word formed faintly in the gutter of the ledger, not in ink, but in dented paper, as if written with a dry nib. Return. I thought of the cup at 3:15, the way steam had shaped and gone. I thought of the careful ring on the glaze, the crack deepening. I thought of the way the guard had said bring a receipt, even if it burns twice. I set my right hand on the edge of the table, palms clean, and nodded to the book with the respect due a living thing. Then I stepped back and returned to the elevator without putting any mark to paper. The car's floor rose under me like a breath. Back on 3, the archive glowed with the same patient light. My chair had kept my shape. At 1:55, the radio spoke my name in the voice of a person I trusted from a decade ago. I counted breaths, steady, 212. It sighed and withdrew. At 212, it sighed and withdrew. At 2 sarin 4, 1 box, heard, the mezzanine replied, voice thin with endurance. It's going to tell you the terms. Let them pass through. Keep your house. The terms arrived in the way old instruments announce themselves, a hum in the duct that turned into vowels before it turned into words. The room cooled just enough to make my forearms sing. It said no. It urged without calendar or clock. We keep the names that you write and the hours you let us. We give you passage, and we give you quiet, and we give you a place to set your work down. Tell us yes with your hand, and your time will live here. Tell us no with your silence, and we will return your time to you in small coins. You will lose between couch cushions. I felt the pen downstairs without touching it. I felt the ledger's page poised like a breath. The radio stayed wisely asleep. The clock gave me its count. I thought of the guard guarding a different kind of mathematics. I thought of the coastal bell asking, "What will you give me?" And the only answer that had worked, "What do you give me?" I bent over the last pages and did the plainest work of the week. Flatten, feed, scan, save. The scanner took the final sheet with a small gratitude. Done. The cartwheels did not squeak when I pushed it. The padlock clicked shut as if enjoying the sound of closure. The elevator waited and did not try to be clever. At 5, the radio woke precisely to say nothing at all, a static the shape of a nod. At 5:12, footsteps in the hall kept perfect pace with my cart and stopped when I stopped. I didn't test it. At 5:20, the west stair rested, finally bored with itself. At 5:30, my reflection in the window remembered to be only mine. At 5:39, I stood in the lobby again with the ledger in its posture of appetite. The pen lay exactly where I had left it, which is to say, exactly where it had wanted to be. The half letter beneath my name was paler still, like a bruise resolving. I breathed, counted 5 of the slowest breaths I owned, and let the book hear my rule again without words. You owe me my house. The paper made no sound. The air softened as if starch had been rinsed from it. On the mezzanine, the guard's pencil stopped moving and then moved again, just enough to tell me he had witnessed what didn't happen. I took the pen, not to the page the ledger wanted, but to the margin outside the ruled lines, and drew a small circle with a line through it, a private sign that meant not now, not like this, closed for night. The nib scratched lightly. The mark looked foolish and precisely right. I set the pen down. The book accepted my impertinence, the way an ocean accepts a pebble, entirely and without conceding anything. North doors, the guard reminded, voice normal again, human-sized. I looked up at him. He looked back, a man at a rail in an old building, tired and careful and alive. 5 nights, he said. That's belonging. You kept your house. Does it forgive me? I asked, not sure whether I meant the building or the book or the part of me that had wanted to sign. He considered that as if it were a good crossword clue. It remembers you, he said. It lets you go through the mornings. That's what forgiveness is in places like this. The north doors opened into a thin dawn that had polished its light on the river. I stepped out with the rules in my pockets, like receipts that would not burn. Buses yawned. A woman walking a dog nodded as if she knew where I'd been. The city's louder clocks started their day. I let them be theirs. At home, I set water to boil, and without thinking, reached for 2 mugs. I poured into one and left the other empty, then laughed at myself and filled them both. When I slept, I dreamed not of ledgers or stairs or glass, but of pages lying flat under a palm. of a pen rolling toward a hand and stopping, of a radio making the sound a person makes when they're about to say your name and decide to let you keep it. The next week, I returned to Whittemore and Glass because contracts end when they end, and doors remember you politely for a while. The elevator blinked agreement. The mezzanine guard wore his blazer like weather. The ledger wanted me where it wanted me, and I replied by placing my hand on the marble an inch away, the way you greet a dog that isn't yours. The book seemed satisfied with the courtesy. I worked. I kept the hour. When the building asked me again in its various voices to move my house into its pages, I asked it back and then asked it smaller questions. How many boxes tonight? How many steps on the stair? How many breaths until the hour says we're allowed to speak? Places like to be counted. Counting makes shapes. Shapes keep you. On my last shift before the contract finished, I slipped the red notebook into the proper folder because it had learned to leave itself in the wrong places when it wanted company. There was one new line in the neat, tired hand. If you leave before 5 nights, bring a receipt. If you leave after, bring a rule. I wrote beneath it, small as a seamstress's mark, I keep my house. Ask me back. I closed the cover, washed a cup that had not been used, dried it, left no proof of wet. The ledger downstairs lay open as always. I nodded to it, as you nod to an instrument that is played well and cleanly. The guard lifted his pencil and set it down and said nothing because nothing needed saying. The north doors gave me the day, and the day took me, and the building behind me ticked in its bones, a metronome that would continue with or without my attention. In the weeks that followed, when the city grew loud, and I felt myself thinning to the shape of a person only bus windows recognize, I took out the habit I had brought home from Whitmore and Glass and counted the kettle's small argument, the elevator in my apartment deciding, the neighbor's careful key, the click my door makes when it forgives me for leaving again. If a pane of night glass ever thought to write me a word, I let it keep its vocabulary. If a stare repeated itself in the corner of my mind, I did not correct it. If a ledger waited in my sleep with a pen tilted at a persuasive angle, I placed my palm on the table beside it and asked it back, "What do you owe me?" And when morning came, as it does, as it did, I left by the north doors of whatever room I was in, belonging to myself and to the small rules that buy the kind of quiet a person can actually rest inside. Thank you for listening. If this story kept you company tonight, consider liking the video and subscribing for more myths, legends, and gentle hauntings. Sleep well, and may the trails you choose lead you safely home.